The annals of history contain a profound enigma. What if the most impactful life ever chronicled is simultaneously the one most enveloped in an almost impenetrable veil of silence? For countless generations, both devout adherents and discerning skeptics have found themselves captivated by the extraordinary persona of Jesus of Nazareth, an individual whose profound pronouncements irrevocably altered the trajectory of civilizations, and whose timeless parables continue to resonate through the corridors of history. His arrival into the world is vividly commemorated through cherished nativity scenes, while his formative years are punctuated by a singular, illuminating account. His precocious engagement with scholars in the temple at the tender age of 12. Following this pivotal moment, however, an astonishing void opens in the historical record, leaving an almost unnerving emptiness. This ensuing silence is not merely an absence of information, it is a chasm so profound that its very emptiness reverberates with a deeper significance than any spoken account. For an astonishing span of nearly 2 decades, from his 12th year until his 30th, the canonical Gospels offer not a single recorded incident or observation. This constitutes a biographical lacuna so immense, one might figuratively traverse an entire continent within its unwritten expanse. Such a prolonged narrative cessation feels less like an accidental omission and more akin to a deliberate act of redaction or even erasure. One is compelled to ponder: did the original chroniclers genuinely lack knowledge of these formative years? Or did they perhaps consciously opt to withhold such details? Was this period deemed inconsequential to their theological narrative? Or did it contain information that was, for reasons yet unknown, considered perilous or inconvenient to divulge? History, in its enigmatic fashion, frequently leaves tantalizing voids precisely where human curiosity most ardently seeks illumination and intricate particulars. When examining the chronicles of monarchs, historians can typically pinpoint the precise dates of their triumphant battles, identify the names of their consorts, and delineate the lineage of their successors. Similarly, for eminent philosophers, scholars meticulously trace their intellectual disciples, analyze their correspondence, and dissect their ideological inconsistencies. Yet, remarkably, at the very core of what is arguably the most profoundly influential narrative ever recounted, one encounters an astonishing chasm of biographical absence, starkly contrasting with the richness of other historical figures. It is almost as if the sacred chronicle of Jesus' earthly existence constitutes a precious manuscript from which crucial pages have been deliberately excised. No, the narrative ink appears to abruptly cease mid-sentence, only to dramatically resume, plunging the reader directly into a scene where a fully developed man stands poised on the verdant banks of the Jordan River, on the cusp of commencing his transformative public ministry. Thus, suspended between the depiction of a remarkable boy and the advent of the revered Messiah, lies an enduring mystery, a profound silence that appears far too intentional to be casually dismissed. This enigmatic void has been formally designated by scholars as the missing years, or the lost years of Jesus. However, this nomenclature itself can be somewhat deceptive, for in the vast tapestry of history, nothing truly vanishes without a trace. Instead, narratives often fragment, drifting through time to survive as elusive whispers, nestled within the obscure margins of forgotten manuscripts, or safeguarded within the hallowed confines of remote monastic libraries. When a significant portion of a story is conspicuously absent, it frequently implies not mere disappearance, but rather a deliberate concealment. And if something has been purposefully hidden, then the profound implication is that it was concealed for a compelling, perhaps even extraordinary reason. Certain academic perspectives contend that the Gospels were never intended as comprehensive biographical accounts, but rather as condensed theological narratives designed to underscore only those aspects deemed spiritually pertinent. Yet, a purely theological rationale struggles to adequately account for the astonishing abruptness of this narrative excision. The almost jarring manner in which the story leaps from the depiction of his boyhood directly to his baptism, leaving an absolute vacuum in between. Could it be that this vast, unexplained chasm conceals information that was, at the time, deemed inconvenient or challenging to the emerging narrative? Might it be that extensive journeys, or perhaps even profound teachings considered too alien to the established theological framework, were discreetly omitted by those who ultimately shaped the canonical story that has been passed down through generations? The enduring enigma surrounding these undocumented years has captivated and, indeed, haunted the minds of historians, mystics, and spiritual seekers across countless centuries. Within the vast, echoing shadows of this profound silence, a myriad of compelling speculations has inevitably taken root and blossomed. Some theorize that Jesus simply remained within the confines of Nazareth, diligently pursuing his craft as a carpenter, quietly accumulating wisdom through the rhythms of an ordinary, humble existence. Others, however, vehemently assert that an individual could not possibly have re-emerged with such unparalleled spiritual authority and such profound depth of vision unless he had ventured far beyond the well-trodden, familiar hills of Galilee, experiencing worlds unknown to his provincial upbringing. For it is crucial to remember that the ancient world, during his era, was by no means a hermetically sealed or insular environment. Quite the contrary. Vast networks of arterial roads crisscrossed the sprawling landmasses, serving as conduits not merely for the exchange of material goods, but equally for the vibrant circulation of philosophical ideas, diverse religious doctrines, and captivating narratives. Caravans, laden with exotic wares and knowledge, journeyed relentlessly eastward towards the distant realms of Persia and India, westward towards the formidable empires of Rome and Spain, southward into the mysterious continent of Africa, and northward towards the expansive, wind-swept steppes. A truly inquisitive and restless spirit, compelled by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, could readily embark upon these ancient pathways and be transported into cultures and worlds utterly divergent from their place of origin. Is it conceivable, then, that this profound silence is not an indication of emptiness or inactivity, but rather a veiled testament to extensive journeys? Could the precocious boy who so astonishingly captivated and challenged the learned elders in Jerusalem have evolved into a young man who deliberately sought profound wisdom beneath unfamiliar constellations, in distant lands where his specific name might never have been explicitly recorded, yet where his impactful presence, his very shadow, was undeniably felt? Indeed, certain apocryphal texts, deliberately excluded from the accepted scriptural canon, subtly allude to clandestine teachings and fragmented accounts that compellingly suggest his unparalleled wisdom may have originated from sources far beyond the conventional boundaries of Judea. Intriguingly, during the 19th century, Intrepid travelers venturing into the remote regions of Tibet and Kashmir brought back astonishing claims of having encountered ancient manuscripts. These documents reportedly described a revered wandering holy man known as Isa, whose life narrative bore an almost uncanny and perplexing resemblance to that of Jesus of Nazareth. While these compelling accounts were summarily dismissed by some as elaborate fabrications or fanciful legends, they were ardently defended by others as potentially suppressed historical memories. Such narratives continue to ignite fervent curiosity among researchers and believers alike, precisely because they resonate so profoundly with and seek to fill the very same significant void deliberately left within the canonical scriptures. Regardless of the ultimate veracity of these tantalizing fragments or apocryphal whispers, the profound scriptural silence concerning this period remains an undeniable and stark reality. It rests conspicuously between two distinct, unshakable poles of historical certainty: the astonishingly wise child engaging with scholars in the temple, and the fully grown man standing ready for baptism at the Jordan River. Within this expansive, unwritten space, human imagination finds fertile ground to take root, and the very fabric of history becomes remarkably pliable. These missing years thus transform into an immense, inviting canvas upon which fervent seekers, critical skeptics, and imaginative dreamers are all empowered to project and paint their own diverse portraits of what might have been, envisioning an array of compelling possibilities. Is it not plausible, then, that this very silence is not a deficiency in the historical record, but rather a deliberate invitation, an intentional blank space left for humanity? Perhaps it was designed so that each successive generation might be compelled to earnestly inquire anew. What profound experiences, what formative influences, truly shaped the extraordinary man who would ultimately reshape the entire world? The intellectual and spiritual journey into this pivotal question does not commence with definitive answers or established certainties, but rather with this very void, a silence that, far from being empty, subtly hums with an almost palpable potential, a significant gap in the narrative that may yet conceal forgotten pathways, ancient, hidden scrolls, and profound, buried truths. This compelling exploration beckons us to heed those faint, persistent whispers and courageously venture into the vast unknown. Imagine, for a moment, holding in one's hands a unique kind of map, not a chart of physical geography, but rather a parchment delineating silence itself. On this extraordinary document, entire vast regions are conspicuously left utterly blank, as if no human hand possessed the audacity or the knowledge to even attempt to sketch their contours. This evocative image precisely captures how the canonical Gospels choose to portray the life of Jesus between his boyhood and his 30th year. They simply turn the narrative page, leaving the ensuing space starkly empty. There are no roads meticulously drawn, no names of bustling towns or serene villages, no records whatsoever of profound teachings or significant interactions. It is, in essence, a vast, unwritten map of missing time. Yet even as the sacred scriptures seem to close their narrative eyes to this specific period, the broader tapestry of history itself was pulsating with an astonishing vitality and ceaseless movement. Precisely within those same years, the first century following Christ's birth, a labyrinthine network of ancient trade routes intricately crisscrossed the entire known world, thrumming with an almost unbelievable energy. From the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean, resilient caravans embarked on arduous journeys, stretching relentlessly eastward into the mystical lands of Arabia, the ancient empire of Persia, and the distant, fabled subcontinent of India. From the fertile Nile Delta of Egypt, seafaring vessels bravely navigated the waters of the Red Sea, rounded the formidable Horn of Africa, and ventured into the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. From bustling urban centers like Damascus and Antioch, the vital arteries of commerce pulsed vigorously, conveying not only luxurious silk, exotic spices, and precious gems, but also an invaluable cargo of diverse ideas and cultural influences. These sprawling pathways were far from being mere exotic detours or peripheral afterthoughts in the ancient economy. They constituted the very lifeblood, the essential highways of antiquity. Tangible evidence of this profound interconnectedness abounds. Ancient Roman coins have been meticulously unearthed by archaeologists in distant India. Exquisite Chinese silks have been discovered adorning Egyptian tombs, and the rich, aromatic scent of Persian incense once wafted through the hallowed temples as far westward as Athens. This was emphatically not an era characterized by insular isolation, but rather a period defined by a ceaseless and vibrant global exchange. The world of that time was demonstrably more expansive and interconnected than the biblical narrative often suggests, yet paradoxically, also far more intimately interwoven than many modern imaginations might initially conceive. The compelling question thus arises, could a young, spiritually inquisitive seeker, emerging from the modest confines of Galilee, have indeed embarked upon these very roads, venturing into the wider world? For some, such a proposition might initially appear utterly inconceivable, suggesting an insurmountable distance. Yet, the overwhelming historical evidence of profound global connection and constant cultural interchange renders this notion not merely a remote possibility, but a highly plausible scenario. Pilgrims undertook arduous spiritual journeys. Intrepid traders traversed vast distances for commerce, and revered sages and wandering holy men routinely embarked on extensive travels. Given this pervasive context of movement and exploration, why should such an extraordinary individual as Jesus be considered an exception to this ancient norm? Envision it, if only for a fleeting moment, the boy from Nazareth, now matured into a young man, discreetly integrating himself into a bustling caravan destined for the distant east. His feet, now accustomed to the desert's shifting sands, press steadily onward beneath a vast, star-dusted sky. He would have undoubtedly encountered a cacophony of foreign tongues, witnessed robes dyed in hues utterly unknown in the humble villages of Galilee, and inhaled the intoxicating aromas of spices so intensely pungent they might have seemed to emanate from another realm entirely. He would have walked alongside seasoned travelers who recounted tales of philosophical traditions far predating the very foundations of Rome, conversing with individuals whose profound teachings traced their ancient lineage not to the sacred precincts of Jerusalem, but to the mystical lands of India, or even further beyond. Should such an extraordinary journey have indeed transpired, its intricate details were conspicuously absent from any canonical map of his life. Yet, it is a crucial historical principle that an absence of explicit record does not equate to an absence of compelling possibility. The unwritten map of these undocumented years of his existence is akin to an ancient, tightly wound scroll, its central sections still securely sealed, patiently awaiting the persistent efforts of genuinely curious hands to carefully unroll and finally reveal its hidden contents. And perhaps this ongoing process of inquiry is precisely what dedicated seekers across countless centuries have instinctively undertaken. They confront the stark blankness of the narrative and, driven by an inherent compulsion, begin to meticulously sketch their own interpretations. Intrepid explorers in the 19th century, for instance, tentatively traced faint lines on their maps, pointing towards the remote mountainous regions of Ladakh and Tibet. Mystics during the enigmatic Middle Ages quietly whispered of clandestine travels into the ancient heartland of Persia. Even within certain rich Islamic traditions, Jesus is occasionally depicted as a profound wanderer, a revered prophet who extensively roamed lands far beyond the familiar confines of Judea. While it may be tempting, and indeed convenient, to summarily dismiss these diverse accounts as mere legends, or as products of wishful thinking meticulously woven across the fabric of centuries, it becomes significantly more challenging to ignore the profound and undeniable silence itself. One is left to ponder, what compelling motivation could have led the Gospel writers to leave nearly 2 full decades of such a pivotal life entirely unaddressed, unless there existed something within that period that was either too intricately complex, too profoundly inconvenient, or perhaps even too utterly wondrous to be simply condensed into a straightforward narrative. Every ancient map, in its quest to delineate the known world, inevitably features its own unique legends and uncharted margins, those intriguing spaces where early cartographers once inscribed the ominous warning, "Here be dragons." The missing years of Jesus, in this profound analogy, represent precisely such a margin. The canonical Gospels, in their deliberate choice, opted not to chart these particular territories. Yet, the broader currents of history subtly suggest that these years were, in fact, brimming with significant movement and profound experiences. And it is precisely between these two compelling realities, the scriptural void and the historical dynamism, that an enduring mystery resides, a mystery as vast and as deep as the ancient deserts he may well have traversed. As the metaphorical candle of certainty burns ever lower, one might find oneself imaginatively turning this enigmatic map slowly in one's hands, its aged edges feeling crisp, its central expanse remaining tantalizingly blank. Within that profound blankness, however, lies not an end, but an irresistible invitation to embark on an intellectual and spiritual odyssey, to wander, to follow the faintest traces of hidden roads, and to seek out the ancient, forgotten paths that might, at long last, unveil the profound secrets of where those purportedly lost years were truly spent. To the contemporary imagination, Galilee often appears as a quaint, unassuming corner of the ancient world, a tranquil lake, a scattering of modest fishing villages, and gentle rural hillsides where shepherds quietly tended their flocks. Yet, it is a critical historical oversight to perceive Galilee in the 1st century as isolated. Far from being sealed away, it was strategically positioned near bustling crossroads, where ancient roads converged and diverged, where resilient caravans frequently passed, where a vibrant medley of languages intermingled, and where an intellectually curious young man could readily encounter and absorb the tantalizing whispers of distant kingdoms and cultures. The formidable Roman Empire, vast in its dominion and relentless in its expansion, had by then firmly established Judea as one of its numerous provinces. With this conquest came the inevitable construction of an extensive network of roads, those remarkably straight, enduring ribbons of meticulously laid stone that served as the very sinews binding the colossal empire together. While legions of soldiers certainly marched upon them, so too did countless merchants. The caravans that laboriously trudged along these thoroughfares were not solely laden with prosaic commodities like grain or salt. They were equally vital conduits, carrying the captivating narratives of India, the advanced astronomical knowledge of Persia, and the profound, esoteric wisdom of ancient Egypt. In essence, every single road became a veritable moving library, and each weary caravan transformed into an impromptu classroom for any individual possessing the discerning ears and an open mind willing to absorb its lessons. Could Jesus, in his formative years, have been such a listener? One might compellingly envision him venturing beyond the confined, familiar streets of Nazareth, perhaps seeking out weary travelers as they rested by a communal well. It is conceivable he might have engaged in profound conversations with a seasoned caravan master, who recounted tales of opulent silk merchants from the distant East, men who spoke of magnificent golden statues and serene temples where monks donned vibrant saffron robes. Perhaps he absorbed the teachings of venerable sages, who expounded upon the profound principles of boundless compassion, spiritual detachment, and the elusive path to inner peace. To encounter such profound stories and philosophies just once might be dismissed as mere happenstance. However, to hear them repeatedly, to be steeped in such diverse wisdom over time, could undoubtedly ignite a profound spiritual calling. And in that interconnected ancient world, there were indeed countless such roads waiting to be traveled. To the north, the ancient world was traversed by the Via Maris, often called the Way of the Sea, a critical commercial thoroughfare that extended from the fertile lands of Egypt all the way to the venerable city of Damascus and beyond. Eastward, various arteries of travel stretched, reaching the distant frontiers of Mesopotamia's venerable civilizations and the lofty plateaus of Persia, where the sacred flames within Zoroastrian fire temples were said to burn with an eternal luminescence. Southern routes guided travelers towards the sophisticated intellectual hubs of Egypt, notably Alexandria, a renowned center where the profound tenets of Greek philosophy found an intriguing confluence with the esoteric doctrines of Jewish mysticism within its celebrated libraries. And extending far into the eastern horizon, the fabled Silk Road, a legendary network of pathways, meandered through formidable deserts, scaled towering mountain ranges, and linked verdant oases, ultimately reaching the vibrant cultures of India and the ancient dynasties of China. It is often a natural inclination to envision Jesus as strictly confined to his immediate birthplace, Nazareth, until the pivotal moment of his baptism. However, such a notion of isolation appears discordant with the dynamic historical environment he inhabited. Nazareth itself was situated merely a short distance from Sepphoris, a burgeoning urban center undergoing extensive construction during Jesus' formative years. Certain historical scholars propose that he may have engaged his skills there as a skilled artisan, contributing to the erection of dwellings for affluent patrons. Had this been the case, he would have witnessed not only the opulent manifestations of Roman imperial influence, but also the captivating melange of diverse cultures it attracted, currency minted in distant realms, architectural designs echoing both Hellenic and Oriental aesthetic principles, and wayfarers recounting tales of places far exceeding the comprehension of a typical village dweller. All these observations collectively provoke a compelling inquiry. What if Jesus did not merely passively absorb these captivating narratives? What if, instead, he actively pursued the paths they described? The expansive road networks, like inviting portals, seemed to beckon. And the deliberate reticence of the canonical Gospels regarding his early adulthood leaves ample conceptual space for the distinct possibility that he stepped through them. For the individual who would one day eloquently speak of the delicate lilies gracing the fields and the humble sparrows dwelling beneath the vast heavens also appeared to possess a profound grasp of the deeper currents of human suffering and the universal quest for liberation. His profound parables, while intrinsically rooted in the immediate and familiar imagery of his local environment, frequently resonate with a universal applicability that feels significantly more expansive than the confines of Galilee. Could such an encompassing resonance have been cultivated and enriched by journeys into distant lands, where sophisticated wisdom traditions had flourished and evolved over countless centuries? The extensive road network stretching beyond Galilee was far more than a mere channel for commercial exchange. It represented a vibrant pathway of profound human encounter, an intricate tapestry of connections binding disparate cultures into a shared, albeit often fragile, global community. To traverse these routes was to bridge not only vast physical distances, but also to transcend the conventional boundaries of human thought and spiritual understanding. And so, as one contemplates this intriguing possibility, the conventional perception of Galilee undergoes a profound transformation. It is no longer merely an isolated settlement, seemingly suspended in a state of pious tranquility, but rather emerges as a pivotal gateway. Through that symbolic threshold, a young man might have embarked, whose early silence would later resonate powerfully as profound teaching. An individual who potentially journeyed extensively before his eventual return to the sacred waters of the Jordan. The road leading beyond Galilee was undeniably present, unrestrictedly open, patiently awaiting, and subtly vibrant with the murmuring echoes of voices carried from the distant east. Regardless of whether he physically traversed it, the narrative gaps within the Gospels compel us to ponder this question. And within that very act of wondering, the contours of this potential journey begin to unfold in our imagination. Nazareth, a modest human settlement delicately perched upon the undulating hills of Galilee, often appears to contemporary observers as a remote and undeniably provincial locale. Yet such initial impressions can be deceptive. In the 1st century, Nazareth was situated considerably closer to the world's most vital arteries of communication and trade than might be intuitively imagined. Merely a brief excursion away lay Sepphoris, a bustling and rapidly developing urban center where numerous Roman roads converged, and whose vibrant marketplaces reverberated with the cacophony of spoken Greek, Aramaic, Latin, and even the exotic tones of Persian. For an individual born into the humble profession of a carpenter's son, such strategic proximity inherently implied a wealth of potential opportunities and exposure. Merchants, spiritual pilgrims, and learned scholars were in constant motion, ceaselessly traversing the ancient Levant. From the illustrious city of Alexandria in Egypt to the significant metropolis of Antioch in Syria, these intricate routes pulsed with a dynamic and continuous exchange of goods, ideas, and people. These were not obscure or seldom used tracks, but rather well-established and frequently trodden highways were extensive caravans, heavily laden with valuable commodities such as shimmering silk, fragrant frankincense, precious ivory, and exquisite jewels, passed through local villages, treating them as mere stepping stones on their arduous journeys toward distant and often unseen horizons. Should a young man feel an inner compulsion to follow such a path, he would certainly not have found himself in solitude. The Silk Road, that legendary and enduring thread which intricately bound the civilizations of the East and West, was already a vibrant and active network centuries prior to the birth of Jesus. It was not a singular, clearly defined thoroughfare, but rather a complex and multifaceted web of interconnected routes, winding camel trails snaking across vast deserts, challenging mountain passes leading into the heart of Persia, maritime voyages spanning the expansive Indian Ocean, and extensive inland caravan routes where weary merchants would find respite, offer prayers, and exchange captivating stories. This monumental road system served not merely as a conduit for the transportation of tangible goods, but profoundly as a channel for the dynamic flow of abstract ideas, advanced mathematical concepts, astronomical observations, medical knowledge, and diverse philosophical doctrines that traveled intrinsically with the merchants who conveyed them. One might contemplate Jesus in his 20s, perhaps experiencing an inner restlessness, drawn inexorably towards something far beyond the familiar confines of his carpenter's tools. It is conceivable that he departed from Nazareth and joined a caravan heading towards Damascus, its camels swaying rhythmically under the considerable weight of richly patterned Persian rugs and aromatic Indian spices. Perhaps he attentively listened to the merchants as they recounted tales of profound sages in India who championed the virtue of compassion, of enigmatic mystics in Persia who spoke reverently of an eternal, sacred fire, and of dedicated seekers in Tibet who pursued spiritual liberation through intensive meditation. The road, in this context, transcended its function as a mere passage of trade, becoming instead a profound journey of personal and spiritual transformation. Could this young Galilean have truly journeyed far enough to reach such distant lands? Skeptics often contend that the geographical distances were simply too vast, and the inherent hazards of such travel too severe to be feasible. Yet countless other individuals successfully undertook similar arduous expeditions. Merchants, religious pilgrims, and dedicated spiritual seekers traversed thousands of miles across the ancient world. Archaeological discoveries of Roman coins unearthed in India provide tangible evidence of the extensive reach of Mediterranean travelers. Similarly, the presence of Buddhist statues found in Alexandria clearly demonstrates how profound Eastern philosophies had already permeated and influenced the Western world. The Silk Road was unequivocally not a mere figment of imagination. It constituted a vibrant and tangible reality of the ancient global landscape. And the narrative omissions, the profound silence within the canonical Gospels, inherently create ample room for such a possibility. Might Jesus have indeed followed the ancient road eastward, venturing into regions where sophisticated spiritual traditions had been meticulously cultivated and evolving over many centuries? Certain later oral traditions prevalent in Kashmir and Ladakh subtly whisper that he did. These accounts speak of a foreign teacher, a compassionate healer known as Isa, who moved freely among the impoverished and marginalized, imparting lessons of kindness, profound humility, and a radical rejection of material wealth. Their ancient scrolls, if their authenticity were to be firmly established, meticulously described journeys that bear an uncanny and striking resemblance to the journeys of the ancient Greeks, resemblance to the events that would later be chronicled in the Gospels. If these intriguing accounts were to prove true, then the pathway stretching from Nazareth to the fabled Silk Road was far more than a mere physical passage. It represented a profound metaphorical bridge through which diverse wisdom traditions converged and intermingled, ultimately forging a universal voice that would resonate powerfully across the centuries. And even if these compelling stories ultimately remain relegated to the realm of legend, the sheer possibility they present compels us to fundamentally reevaluate our understanding of Nazareth, viewing it not as a definitive endpoint, but rather as a crucial beginning. Within this interpretive framework, the small village transforms into a significant threshold. From its elevated hills, one could metaphorically gaze outward towards the ancient city of Damascus, towards the vast expanses of Persia, towards the spiritual heartland of India, and indeed, far beyond. The profound silence of the Gospels thus becomes less like an empty, featureless void, and more akin to an inviting doorway deliberately left ajar. And perhaps Jesus, driven by a deep inner restlessness and a profound search for truth, indeed walked through that very doorway into the wider, more expansive world, embarking on a journey from Nazareth all the way to the Silk Road. Such a monumental journey would, of course, not be meticulously recorded within the canonical Gospels, but perhaps it was carefully preserved in the subtle whispers carried eastward across vast distances, meticulously hidden within ancient scrolls, and indelibly etched into the collective memories of distant lands that fondly recalled a wandering teacher whose origins lay far to the west, far from the familiar landscapes of Galilee, high amidst the challenging paths of the majestic Himalayas, and deep within the serene confines of ancient monasteries where the fragrant smoke of incense still gently drifts through the intricate rafters. Venerable chronicles subtly whisper of a wise sage who hailed from the distant west. They refer to him by the name Isa. His name echoes faintly, like the resonant chime of a bell struck in another far-off land, carrying a sound that is simultaneously familiar and yet profoundly strange. In the latter part of the 19th century, a Russian explorer named Nicholas Notovich famously claimed to have unearthed these extraordinary accounts within a secluded Tibetan monastery nestled in Ladakh. He meticulously described texts which recounted the eastward travels of the young Isa, detailing his dedicated study of the sacred writings of the Vedas, his tutelage under the esteemed priests of India, and his benevolent acts of teaching compassion to the humble and downtrodden. The narratives vividly portray a foreign teacher who vehemently denounced the rigid divisions of the caste system, who consistently championed the cause of the poor, and who consequently incited the considerable ire of the Brahmins for daring to challenge their entrenched authority. Skeptical voices were quick to vehemently dismiss Notovich's sensational claims. They accused him outright of fabrication, of skillfully weaving intricate fiction from mere fragments of unsubstantiated rumor and local folklore. Yet, despite the intense criticism, his compelling tale steadfastly refused to vanish from public consciousness. Other independent travelers subsequently reported encountering strikingly similar narratives concerning Isa among the revered lamas of Tibet. Even if specific details within these varying accounts shifted or diverged, the fundamental core of the story remained remarkably consistent. a prominent figure originating from the Western world, who traversed the ancient roads of India and bequeathed a legacy of teachings that resonated deeply with both Hindu and Buddhist spiritual traditions. Could these ancient texts genuinely preserve a historical memory of Jesus during his unrecorded missing years? If such a proposition were true, the implications would be nothing short of extraordinary. For within these narratives, we catch an intriguing glimpse of a profound bridge between the spiritual traditions of the East and the West. The son of a Galilean carpenter eloquently speaking of profound mercy in the very land where the Buddha had once taught. A teacher whose transformative words reverberated across two distinct civilizations, geographically separated by vast deserts and formidable mountain ranges. And yet, even when stripped of absolute certainty, the inherent parallels between these traditions are undeniably striking. The profound ethical teachings found in the Sermon on the Mount and the ancient Buddhist Dhammapada both unequivocally exalt the virtue of humility. Both compellingly advocate for the cultivation of compassion even towards one's adversaries. Both strongly urge a spiritual detachment from the transient allure of worldly wealth. Could such deep thematic congruity be merely a coincidence? Perhaps. Or more provocatively, could it be that Jesus himself absorbed and assimilated profound Eastern wisdom before his eventual return to Galilee, where he then reinterpreted and taught it anew to his disciples? The mystery surrounding these possibilities deepens significantly when one considers the intricate ways in which ancient oral traditions were transmitted and traveled. Caravans journeying along the vast expanse of the Silk Road were not solely laden with precious silk and exotic spices. They also carried a rich cargo of stories, legends, and philosophical insights. A sage originating from Judea could quite easily become the captivating subject of numerous fireside retellings within the communal hall of a distant monastery. Over the passage of time, the specific details of the narrative might undergo subtle alterations, and the names of individuals might be modified, but the fundamental essence of the memory would undeniably endure. Perhaps Isa was not Jesus at all, but rather a profound reflection of how diverse, distant peoples reinterpreted and internalized the universal archetype of a holy and compassionate teacher. Or perhaps, and this is the more audacious proposition, Isa and Jesus were, in fact, one and the same historical personage. To delve into and ponder these intricate questions is to embark upon an intellectual journey through historical silence. No canonical gospel explicitly names these potential journeys. No universally accepted canonical text definitively confirms their occurrence. However, the very existence of such persistent accounts in distant lands like India and Tibet strongly suggests something far more significant and profound than mere coincidence. They collectively form subtle whispers in the margins of documented history, providing intriguing hints that Jesus' unwritten and unchronicled years may indeed have been spent far beyond the familiar rolling hills of Galilee. Should the historical figure of Jesus have indeed traversed the ancient pathways of India, his role would transcend that of a mere disciple. He would undoubtedly have also served as an influential instructor. Various historical accounts portray him as an individual who courageously confronted societal inequities, who consistently uplifted the marginalized, and who miraculously restored the ailing through simple physical contact. These particular characteristics are not alien or incongruous with familiar narratives. Rather, they resonate as profound reverberations of the New Testament Gospels themselves, merely transposed into a different linguistic framework, a distinct cultural milieu, and an alternative historical epoch. The profound quietude surrounding those undocumented periods of his life now begins to vibrate with a compelling resonance. It is conceivable that within the vast spiritual landscape of India, he honed the profound empathy and boundless compassion that would ultimately characterize his subsequent public service. Perhaps it was on this very subcontinent that he first articulated the profound principles that would, in time, reverberate from the sacred slopes of the Mount of Beatitudes. Alternatively, it might simply be that humanity itself, across diverse civilizations, spontaneously generates analogous narratives, intricately interweaving parallel streams of spiritual sagacity into a singular, magnificent cultural fabric. The subtly evocative, almost whispering, ancient texts found within India may perpetually elude definitive authentication to the rigorous standards demanded by academic historians. Nevertheless, their undeniable existence serves as a potent reminder that the experiential world of Jesus extended far beyond the confined geographical boundaries of Judea. Concealed within the hallowed, often shadowed confines of Ladakh's remote monasteries, and preserved on the delicate, brittle pages of manuscripts sequestered from Western scholarship for untold centuries, resides a compelling intimation that the revered Messiah of Galilee might also have undertaken a spiritual odyssey as a devout pilgrim of the Orient, ascending to the stratospheric altitudes upon the very roof of the world, where the atmospheric pressure perceptibly diminishes and colossal mountain peaks majestically pierce the azure firmament. Hushed narratives persistently circulate within the ancient monasteries of Tibet. Deep within their venerable, often dimly lit stone chambers, where the gentle flames of butter lamps cast dancing shadows and the rhythmic incantations ascend like ethereal undulations against the profound stillness, age-old legends recount the presence of an enigmatic foreign luminary. These accounts meticulously portray him as an individual originating from the Western lands, humbly attired in unadorned fabric, who engaged in profound theological discussions with local monastic scholars under the soft, ambient illumination of flickering candlelight. These narratives, delicate in their historical footing, yet remarkably enduring in their transmission, vividly depict the persona of Isa, a designation that bears a striking phonetic resemblance to the name Jesus. It is recounted that he appeared in these distant lands not as an imperialistic conqueror or a shrewd merchant, but purely as an earnest spiritual inquirer. He attentively absorbed the profound wisdom articulated by the revered lamas, immersed himself in the disciplined practices of meditative rhythms, and deeply apprehended the intricate doctrine of the perpetual cycle of existence, characterized by birth and rebirth. However, his purpose was not solely to assimilate knowledge. The persistent tales assert that he also imparted his own insights, expounding upon a divine dominion not confined to this earthly realm, and a profound emancipation, founded not upon rigid ceremonial observances, but upon the transformative power of unconditional affection. Is it genuinely plausible that the tranquil, hallowed precincts of Tibet's monasteries once resonated with the cadences of his singular voice? Could those geographically isolated ancient halls have indeed hosted intellectual exchanges, where the evocative parables originating from Galilee encountered the profound philosophical aphorisms or sutras of the Buddha? To merely contemplate such an extraordinary confluence is to picture the powerful convergence of two monumental intellectual currents, flowing together amidst the majestic silence of the Himalayan range. This concept appears inherently unlikely, perhaps even utterly fanciful, given that Tibet remains geographically secluded even in the contemporary era, accessible predominantly through arduous ascents and treacherous mountain defiles. Nevertheless, historical records affirm that both commercial caravans and devout pilgrims successfully navigated these routes in antiquity. Commodities such as lustrous silk, fine wool, and precious turquoise traversed these challenging passes, as did an array of oral traditions and narratives. If material goods could reliably reach Tibet, might not an itinerant spiritual guide also have accomplished such a journey? A selection of Tibetan historical records, irrespective of whether their veracity is unimpeachable or if they have been embellished through subsequent oral transmissions, recount the presence of a notable individual who actively questioned established social hierarchies and rigid ceremonial practices, consistently advocating for the primacy of profound compassion over entrenched traditional customs. He is not recalled as an intrusive foreign entity dictating his doctrines, but rather as a wise luminary whose pronouncements found deep accord with the resident monks. His advocacy for clemency and forgiveness harmonized remarkably with their inherent spiritual conviction in limitless benevolence. However, his emphatic assertion of love as an intrinsic divine essence distinctly differentiated him from prevailing local philosophies. Discerning skeptics frequently contend that these compelling legends are, in essence, the deliberate consequence of Christian missionary endeavors in more recent centuries, narratives reinterpreted and reshaped through the interpretive framework of subsequent Christian interactions. Conversely, other scholars highlight the remarkable tenacity and enduring presence of these very narratives within geographical areas that have experienced minimal, if any, direct exposure to Western religious doctrines. If these accounts were merely inventive fabrications, the logical query arises: why did they manifest in such geographically isolated locales, tenaciously adhering to the venerable oral traditions preserved within cloistered monastic communities? It is plausible that the ultimate veracity resides within the enigmatic process of cultural transmission itself. The life and teachings of a profound spiritual instructor, once intricately interwoven into the enduring tapestry of narrative, possess the remarkable capacity to journey far beyond the geographical distances his physical presence ever traversed. Nevertheless, the striking, almost uncanny congruities compellingly urge us to ponder a profound hypothetical. What if the very voice that once eloquently proclaimed its message in the Galilean region did in fact resonate amidst the profound quietude of a Himalayan evening? What if those devoted monks, long predating the advent of Christian evangelists, meticulously safeguarded a subtle yet persistent recollection of an erudite Western sage who arrived in their lands in pursuit of enlightened understanding? The subtle reverberations emanating from Tibet may perpetually fail to furnish absolute historical certitude. They persist, as ethereal and elusive as the gentle mountain breezes, conveying utterances that bear a distinct resemblance to scriptural excerpts, yet they dissipate like elusive mists when one attempts to grasp them definitively. Nonetheless, these accounts serve as an eloquent testament that the perceived lacuna within the gospel narratives is far from devoid of content. Across formidable mountain ranges, expansive desert landscapes, and the vast expanse of historical eras, that silence audibly resonates in hushed intimations that are simply too compelling and persistent to be entirely disregarded. As one pauses contemplatively amidst the elevated monasteries and their rich tapestry of legends, an palpable sense of the enigma's expansion becomes acutely perceptible. The undefined missing years of this historical figure extend ever further towards the east, propelled by the currents of unverified reports, collective recollections, and the peculiar resilience of narrative tradition. It is conceivable that the venerable sage identified as Issa once assumed a meditative, cross-legged posture amidst the monastic community, his distinctive voice harmonizing with their rhythmic incantations. Alternatively, it might be that the narrative itself constitutes the reverberation, forged not through actual physical journeys over terrain, but through humanity's inherent yearning to forge connections between its most revered spiritual mentors. Situated significantly to the northern reaches of the Indian subcontinent, gently cradled by towering mountain ranges and life-giving rivers, reposes the verdant valley of Kashmir. Renowned globally for its unparalleled, breathtaking natural splendor, this region has historically functioned as a vibrant nexus for a multitude of cultures, including the ancient Hindu, the profound Buddhist, the sophisticated Persian, and subsequently, the influential Islamic traditions. Yet, interwoven within its subtle, orally transmitted lore, another intriguing narrative persists, one that compels and expands the very boundaries of human conjecture. The enduring recollection of an itinerant spiritual guide, a miraculous healer whose spectral presence continues to subtly permeate the collective consciousness of the area. Within the quaint hamlets and the rich tapestry of local oral traditions, this enigmatic figure is occasionally characterized as an individual of non-indigenous provenance, exhibiting an exceptionally gentle and benevolent disposition, who eloquently expounded upon the virtues of profound empathy and unconditional absolution. He is credited with performing miraculous cures through simple tactile contact, providing sagacious counsel to the economically disadvantaged, and attracting a devoted following, not through the allure of material prosperity or temporal authority, but solely through the pervasive influence of his intrinsic benevolence. His appellation, transmitted through fragmented oral accounts, was reputed to bear a striking phonetic similarity to Issa. Certain narratives further assert that he originated from the distant Western Territories, a realm situated beyond the geopolitical boundaries of Persia, and largely unfamiliar to the indigenous populace of Kashmir. Is it genuinely plausible that this compelling individual could have been Jesus himself, traversing these picturesque valleys during those 18 historically unrecorded years of his life? Such a proposition inherently challenges and disquiets the established tenets of conventional historical scholarship. Nevertheless, the thematic convergences are remarkably pronounced. The profound doctrines ascribed to this enigmatic curer resonate with themes intimately familiar to us: the intrinsic blessedness of the meek, the sacred imperative of tranquility, and the inherent dignity of those often marginalized. His humble existence among the impoverished segments of society powerfully mirrors the identical boundless compassion that subsequently emerges with such vivid clarity within the New Testament Gospels. The singularly most audacious and thought-provoking assertion originates from a specific locale within Srinagar, the bustling capital city of Kashmir, the revered sanctuary universally recognized as the Rosa Ball. Within its sacred confines, a tomb is situated, which is reverently regarded by some as the ultimate resting place of Yuz Asaf, a saint venerated in local tradition as both a prophetic figure and a miraculous healer. Certain long-standing traditions, despite being vehemently contested by numerous scholars, staunchly maintain that Yuz Asaf was, in fact, none other than Jesus of Nazareth, who embarked upon a journey to India and ultimately attained an advanced age within the subcontinent. Indigenous folklore seamlessly integrates him into their own rich cultural legacy, portraying him not as an alien visitor, but as a revered holy man who intimately traversed their ancestral lands. To physically stand in the presence of the Rosa Bal Shrine is to experience a profound sensation of historical narratives quivering with an array of tantalizing possibilities. Is it truly conceivable that the individual subjected to crucifixion in Jerusalem did not conclude his earthly existence there, but instead embarked upon an extensive pilgrimage eastward to once again impart wisdom and administer healing? Alternatively, could it be that the distinct narratives surrounding Isa and Yuz Asaf gradually converged over the span of many centuries, seamlessly fusing the recollections of various spiritual luminaries into one singular composite figure? Skeptical observers are inclined to discount these assertions as mere instances of syncretism, the amalgamation of indigenous local customs with discernible influences of Christian doctrines introduced considerably later. Nevertheless, the remarkable endurance of this narrative within Kashmir, recounted extensively long before contemporary researchers arrived in pursuit of unearthing lost gospel accounts, strongly intimates a more profound and intricate enigma. Oral traditions, it must be acknowledged, frequently transmit essential truths and methodologies that conventional historical analysis often fails to appreciate or even perceive. What truly merits profound consideration is not the definitive factual certainty of these assertions, but rather their pervasive and enduring spiritual and cultural resonance. The compelling prospect that Jesus once traversed the picturesque valleys of Kashmir compels our collective imagination to extend far beyond the restrictive geographical confines of Judea. It challenges us to conceptualize a Messiah whose profound empathy transcended all geopolitical boundaries, whose physical journey led him to territories situated immensely beyond the imperial sway of the Roman Empire. Irrespective of whether he genuinely stood beneath the elegant cypress trees of Kashmir, the narrative steadfastly endures, glistening with an ethereal quality akin to the shimmering reflection of majestic mountains upon the placid surface of Dal Lake. A revered instructor, a miraculous curer, revered not for martial victories, but for his boundless clemency. A spiritual entity who appeared to simultaneously belong to all places and to no specific location. Perhaps it is precisely for these profound reasons that the valley cherishes and preserves this particular legend with such unwavering devotion. For, in its tender, persistent recollection of an enlightened sage originating from the Western world, Kashmir seamlessly integrates itself into the expansive and overarching enigma of the missing years, transforming into a sacred locale where profound silence appears to materialize into tangible form, and where the subtle intimations of an undisclosed spiritual odyssey continue to permeate the very atmosphere. Amidst the stark, yet captivatingly exquisite, elevated terrains of Ladakh, where venerable stone monasteries appear to defy gravity, clinging precariously to sheer cliff faces, and where the rarefied atmosphere seems imbued with the very essence of timelessness, a truly astonishing assertion once profoundly captivated the Western intellectual sphere. It was specifically in this remote region, during the twilight years of the 19th century, that the intrepid Russian explorer and writer Nicholas Notovich famously declared his discovery of ancient manuscripts detailing the biographical account of Isa, whom he identified as a revered prophet originating from the Western world. Notovich meticulously narrated that subsequent to sustaining a fracture to his leg during an arduous expedition through the formidable Himalayan range, he was transported for convalescence to Hemis Monastery, an isolated and venerable Buddhist sanctuary intricately ensconced amidst the imposing mountains. During his period of recuperation, the resident lamas purportedly unveiled to him a clandestine compendium of ancient scrolls. These venerable documents, according to Notovich, recounted the odyssey of a saintly individual who had journeyed from Judea many centuries prior, who had diligently immersed himself in their sacred scriptures, engaged in profound philosophical discourse with their learned monks, and bequeathed a legacy of doctrines that provoked both fervent reverence and considerable opposition. The ancient writings, as meticulously interpreted and presented by Notovich, vividly depicted Isa as an ardent philosophical inquirer who dedicated extensive periods to intellectual and spiritual engagement among both the Hindu and Buddhist communities. These documents detailed his unequivocal repudiation of the entrenched system of caste-based social stratification, his profound empathetic concern for the subjugated and downtrodden, and his steadfast conviction that authentic spiritual sanctity resided not in the meticulous observance of ceremonial rites, but rather in the profound exercise of benevolent mercy. The striking congruities between these recounted attributes and those of the Jesus portrayed in the New Testament Gospels were, by all accounts, indisputable. When Nicholas Notovich eventually made his way back to Europe and subsequently published an account of his extraordinary discovery, the global community was gripped by a mixture of profound fascination and intense outrage. Some individuals lauded his findings as the most monumental revelation since the very Gospels themselves, a truly earth-shattering event for religious scholarship. Conversely, a vocal contingent vehemently denounced him as nothing more than a charlatan, unequivocally accusing him of fabricating the entire elaborate narrative. Esteemed academics and seasoned scholars, for their part, summarily dismissed the purported scrolls as mere mythological constructs, adamantly insisting that no such historical records could possibly exist. Yet, in a remarkably intriguing turn of events, a number of subsequent travelers who ventured into the remote regions of Ladakh later reported having encountered strikingly similar narratives and oral traditions from the venerable monks residing in the ancient Hemis Monastery. If Notovich's story was indeed a complete fabrication, one is compelled to ponder why these persistent echoes of the tale continued to reverberate through the high valleys of the Himalayas. The enigma surrounding these accounts only deepens when one considers the intrinsic nature of traditional Himalayan knowledge preservation. Crucially, wisdom and historical accounts were not always meticulously confined to single comprehensive manuscripts. Instead, they were frequently dispersed across numerous monasteries, meticulously transmitted through generations via oral traditions, and diligently safeguarded in fragmented forms. It remains a distinct possibility that the Hemis scrolls, assuming their historical existence, were merely a copy or a later transcription of much older accounts that have since been irrevocably lost to time. Alternatively, They might represent elaborate embellishments or expanded narratives, skillfully woven from the faint, distant memories of intrepid travelers whose words had reached the secluded valleys of Tibet many centuries prior. What truly endures as the most compelling aspect of this entire saga is the remarkable level of detail embedded within the story. The vivid recollection of a prophet originating from the distant land of Judea, remembered not as a powerful conqueror or a political figure, but rather as a profound teacher of humility and spiritual enlightenment. The question then becomes, how could such a distinctive figure manifest so clearly in Tibetan collective memory, unless some genuine echo or trace of his actual passage had, in fact, truly permeated these remote regions? Skeptics are entirely justified in their insistence that the rigorous demands of historical inquiry necessitate concrete, verifiable evidence. Nevertheless, the very presence of silence itself, the absence of definitive answers, paradoxically creates an expansive void for contemplation and wonder. And within that profound space, the enduring narrative of the lost scrolls has steadfastly persisted, carried forward through time much like a half-heard, ethereal chant, emanating from the ancient, hushed cloisters of Hemis. Regardless of whether these elusive manuscripts truly exist in a tangible form, their potent legend serves as a compelling invitation to envision a Jesus who might have walked through landscapes where elusive snow leopards roam, who may have engaged in profound study within monasteries where sacred mantras rise in defiance of the biting wind, and who ultimately returned to Galilee imbued with a wisdom that transcended the geographical confines of a single land. The actual scrolls themselves might indeed be irretrievably lost, or perhaps, with equal probability, they never truly existed in the first place. Yet, the captivating narrative of their potential existence continues to ripple outward, much like concentric circles on a still pond, serving as a poignant reminder that the so-called missing years of Jesus' life are far from an empty void. Instead, they are brimming with the tantalizing possibility of clandestine journeys, of sacred words potentially interred within the high-altitude libraries of the majestic Himalayas, patiently awaiting intrepid seekers bold enough to undertake the arduous climb and listen with an open heart, long before the modern term Silk Road was ever uttered or conceptualized. The ancient and powerful empire of Persia stood as the preeminent and indispensable bridge connecting the disparate worlds of the East and the West. Throughout its illustrious history, numerous empires rose to prominence and subsequently collapsed upon its fertile soil. The formidable Achaemenids, the resilient Parthians, and later the influential Sasanians, each successive dynasty leaving behind an indelible legacy of meticulously constructed roads, bustling cities, and magnificent temples. These enduring structures collectively transformed Persia into an unparalleled crossroads of diverse civilizations, a vibrant hub where cultures converged and ideas intermingled. If Jesus did indeed embark on a journey eastward, it is almost an absolute certainty that he would have traversed this ancient land, inhaling its air, which was thick with the heady aromas of incense and the palpable presence of profound philosophical discourse. Persia was by no means an ordinary kingdom. It was the revered cradle of Zoroastrianism, one of the most ancient and enduring known religions centered around the profound veneration of light and fire. Its esteemed priests, famously known as the Magi, were widely reputed to possess the extraordinary ability to interpret the celestial movements of the stars and to discern profound, hidden truths within their ethereal glow. Indeed, the Gospels themselves contain a vivid remembrance of Magi, who undertook a significant journey from the east to bestow honor upon a newborn child in Bethlehem. Could it be plausible that, many years later, there was a profound reversal of that initial journey? A mature Jesus traveling eastward, perhaps seeking the very land from which his initial, wise visitors had originated. The Persian world that Jesus might have encountered was a vibrant tapestry of spiritual diversity and intellectual ferment. Zoroastrian fire temples glowed with an eternal, sacred flame throughout the night, their fires never permitted to extinguish. Thriving Jewish communities flourished in the ancient city of Babylon, meticulously preserving and carrying forward the rich legacy of their ancestral exile. Buddhist monks, journeying westward from the Indian subcontinent, established tranquil monasteries in the verdant oases scattered across the Persian landscape. Along these very same bustling caravan routes, Manichaean preachers moved with purpose, skillfully weaving together intricate visions of cosmic light and pervasive darkness. Persia was, in essence, less a singular, monolithic culture, and more a magnificent mosaic, a kaleidoscopic confluence of traditions where a genuine seeker could encounter entire worlds within worlds. Could Jesus have stood amidst the descendants of the Magi, listening intently to their ancient hymns of fire and the eternal struggle between good and evil? Could he have engaged in profound conversations with Jewish mystics, who were still deeply engrossed in pondering the profound mysteries of their exile, their sacred scriptures resonating with an urgent, apocalyptic hope? In the rich intellectual and spiritual landscape of Persia, the concept of duality, the perpetual war between illuminating light and encroaching darkness, was absolutely central to their worldview. How remarkably striking, then, that Jesus would later eloquently speak of himself as the very light of the world, and of a pervasive darkness that is ultimately incapable of overcoming it. Was this powerful imagery exclusively born within the confines of Judea, or did it perhaps carry the subtle yet resonant echoes of profound Persian philosophical thought? Beyond the realm of religion, Persia offered an unparalleled wealth of wisdom in the advanced fields of medicine, intricate astronomy, and profound philosophy. The numerous caravanserais, which served as essential way stations for weary merchants, were far more than mere places of temporary respite. They were vibrant crossroads of spirited conversation and intellectual exchange. A discerning traveler could find himself seated beside a learned Persian astronomer one night, a contemplative Buddhist monk the next, and an insightful Jewish scholar the following day. If Jesus indeed walked these ancient roads, he would have undoubtedly encountered a rich, interwoven tapestry of ideas, all meticulously woven together beneath the vast, overarching expanse of the same eternal desert sky. Some ancient traditions, whispered through generations, suggest that he absorbed this multifaceted wisdom, not as one who merely imitated, but rather as one who profoundly refined and ultimately transformed it. Perhaps the universal and all-encompassing tone of his later teachings, the pervasive sense that his message transcended all geographical and cultural borders, was profoundly shaped and influenced by these transformative encounters in lands where a multitude of faiths and philosophies already harmoniously mingled. Skeptics will invariably point to the conspicuous silence of canonical scripture and unequivocally declare, "Such speculative notions are nothing more than fanciful dreams." Yet, the very presence of the Magi in the Nativity narrative serves as a powerful reminder that Persia already held a significant, albeit enigmatic, place within the unfolding story. If these wise men could undertake an arduous journey westward in search of a child, why should it be considered impossible or improbable that the grown man, years later, returned eastward to their ancestral homeland, earnestly seeking wisdom among their sacred, eternal fires? The Persian connection lingers persistently, much like a faint, yet discernible thread woven into the intricate tapestry of the missing years. It does not offer definitive proof, but it certainly provides a compelling suggestion. It invites us to imagine a Jesus not rigidly confined to the familiar landscapes of Nazareth, but rather embarking on expansive journeys through distant lands where erudite star readers and profound sages engaged in intense philosophical debates under the watchful gaze of the night sky. Perhaps his perceived silence during these years was not an indication of stillness or inactivity, but rather the quiet hush of footsteps carried resolutely eastward, toward the captivating and enigmatic flames of Persia. When one meticulously places the profound teachings attributed to Jesus alongside the equally profound teachings of the Buddha, the discernible echoes can be strikingly resonant and at times truly astonishing. Despite being separated by significant centuries and vast geographical distances, their respective words frequently appear to articulate the very same fundamental language of boundless compassion, profound humility, and spiritual liberation. Some academic scholars are quick to dismiss these striking similarities as mere coincidence, a random alignment of independent thought. Others, however, demonstrating a more daring intellectual curiosity, venture to suggest a potential influence, proposing that during his enigmatic missing years, Jesus may have indeed encountered Buddhist philosophy and carried its transformative wisdom back to Galilee, profoundly reshaping and enriching his subsequent message. Consider, for instance, the Beatitudes, famously delivered on a verdant hill overlooking the tranquil Sea of Galilee. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers. Now juxtapose these powerful declarations with verses from the ancient Dhammapada, where the Buddha unequivocally declares, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is appeased by love. Conquer anger with love, evil with good, the greedy with generosity, and the liar with truth." Both venerable traditions profoundly exalt the humble and the gentle. Both uplift the suffering and the marginalized. Both passionately advocate for the fundamental transformation of violence into compassionate understanding. How remarkably curious, then, that these profound parallels should exist across such immense geographical and temporal distances. Could it be that they merely reveal a universal truth, independently discovered and articulated in disparate lands and cultures? Or could they, perhaps, point to something far more significant, a genuine exchange of ideas, a direct transmission of wisdom carried along the ancient and bustling trade routes that historically linked the vibrant Mediterranean world to the spiritual heartland of India? By the advent of the 1st century CE, Buddhism had already journeyed considerably far beyond its original birthplace in ancient India. Flourishing monasteries stood prominently in Bactria, situated along the very edges of the vast Persian Empire, Buddhist merchants, with their distinctive robes and serene countenances, traversed the legendary Silk Road, meticulously carrying sacred statues, invaluable scrolls, and captivating stories. Their profound ideas disseminated not only eastward, toward the burgeoning empires of China, but also westward, reaching the very fringes of the expansive Roman world. It is therefore not at all difficult to vividly imagine a genuine spiritual seeker encountering these transformative teachings within the bustling caravanserais, those vital resting places where weary merchants paused and profound sages engaged in spirited intellectual debates. Even in the realm of evocative imagery, the parallels shimmer with remarkable clarity. Jesus spoke eloquently of the lilies in the field, asserting that they were clothed with a splendor exceeding that of even the most powerful kings. The Buddha, in his own teachings, spoke of the pristine lotus flower, rising pure and unstained from the murky, muddy waters below. Both spiritual masters perceived in these natural floral wonders not merely fleeting beauty, but also profound lessons in the impermanence of existence and the pervasive presence of divine care. Both called upon their followers to consciously turn away from the ephemeral allure of material wealth and instead to earnestly seek the enduring treasures of the spirit. Of course, it is imperative to acknowledge that profound differences between these two spiritual traditions undeniably remain. Jesus spoke fervently of a loving Father in heaven, a deeply personal and benevolent God, while the Buddha steadfastly pointed toward a state of profound awakening that transcended the concept of gods, a liberation from the ceaseless cycle of rebirth and suffering. Yet even within these distinct theological frameworks, the underlying tones sometimes remarkably overlap. When Jesus urgently implored his disciples to deny themselves, to courageously take up their cross, and to steadfastly follow him, do we not hear a distinct, resonant echo of the Buddhist call to renounce all worldly attachments and to diligently walk the noble eightfold path toward enlightenment? Skeptics will logically argue that these striking similarities are primarily the result of convergent thought processes, positing that human beings, when confronted with universal suffering and existential dilemmas, will naturally arrive at remarkably similar answers and solutions. However, for those individuals deeply intrigued by the enduring mystery of the missing years, the tantalizing possibility of direct influence is utterly irresistible. If Jesus did indeed journey eastward, if he perhaps sat among contemplative monks in the serene landscapes of India or the high plateaus of Tibet, then these remarkable parallels may be far more than mere coincidence. They may, in fact, be tangible traces of profound teachings that were absorbed, meticulously transformed, and ultimately carried back home. And yet, even if Jesus never actually ventured beyond the familiar borders of Judea, the enduring parallels between his teachings and those of the Buddha remain a powerful reminder that wisdom traditions across the entire world frequently speak to one another in mysterious and often inexplicable ways. They eloquently demonstrate to us that profound compassion, genuine humility, and boundless mercy are not exclusively confined to a single faith or spiritual path, but rather emerge wherever the human heart yearns deeply for ultimate liberation and spiritual fulfillment. So, as we endeavor to trace the faint, ethereal lines connecting the verdant hills of Galilee to the distant, mystical lands of the Buddha, we are ultimately left not with an absolute certainty, but rather with an abiding sense of profound wonder. Perhaps the enigmatic missing years were indeed years characterized by attentive listening, by diligent learning from distant and venerable teachers. Or perhaps they are simply undeniable proof that fundamental truth, much like a mighty river, spontaneously springs forth in myriad places simultaneously across the globe. Either way, the profound parallels persist, shimmering like elusive reflections across still water, perpetually reminding us that the enduring mystery of Jesus may be far more expansive and all-encompassing than we have ever dared to imagine. In the profound traditions of Buddhism, a revered figure emerges, known as the Bodhisattva. This enlightened being embarks on a spiritual quest not for individual liberation, but for the collective emancipation of all sentient life. Unlike those who quietly transcend into nirvana, the Bodhisattva deliberately chooses to remain amidst worldly tribulations, prioritizing boundless compassion over personal release, committing to linger until every suffering soul achieves ultimate freedom. When one contemplates this venerable image alongside the revered figure of Jesus, the striking parallels become remarkably vivid. Here stands a remarkable teacher, renowned for mending the ailing, comforting the impoverished, and ultimately sacrificing his very existence, not for his own benefit, but for the redemption of humanity. This was a man who possessed the capacity to command immense power, yet deliberately chose the arduous path of self-sacrifice. His boundless compassion extended even to those who orchestrated his demise, as he uttered words of forgiveness with his final, fading breath. To some discerning observers, Jesus himself appears as a bodhisattva cloaked in a different guise. Could such a profound resemblance be a mere happenstance, or might it intimate a more profound connection, potentially forged during unrecorded years spent in the company of Buddhist masters who first instilled within him the profound vision of selfless compassion? To envision Jesus assimilating the bodhisattva ideal during extensive travels through the ancient lands of India or Tibet is to picture his eventual return to Galilee, imbued with a vision of salvation unconstrained by rigid ritualistic laws, but rather offered universally and unconditionally. The bodhisattva, after all, was an archetypal figure well established in spiritual discourse. In the centuries preceding Jesus' advent, ancient Buddhist scriptures had journeyed westward, disseminating their profound wisdom. Merchants recounted captivating narratives of Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassionate salvation, and Maitreya, the prophesied future Buddha destined to renew the world. Is it conceivable that echoes of these influential figures resonated in the ears of a young seeker, subtly shaping the trajectory of his extraordinary destiny? Yet, an alternative hypothesis presents itself. Perhaps the compelling likeness arises not from direct influence, but from a spontaneous convergence of spiritual insight. It may be that whenever humanity deeply contemplates suffering, it instinctively conceives of the same profound solution, a guiding figure who steadfastly refuses to avert their gaze, who willingly shoulders the burdens of others, and who ultimately becomes the crucial conduit between utter despair and unwavering hope. If this is indeed the case, then the striking similarity between Jesus and the Bodhisattva may unveil a truth far grander than mere historical correlation. It may reveal a universal verity that transcends all geographical and religious boundaries. Nevertheless, the enigma persists and continues to beckon inquiring minds. Certain apocryphal texts, existing outside the canonical Bible, portray Jesus using language astonishingly akin to Eastern philosophical thought. The Acts of Thomas, for instance, depicts his enigmatic twin as an itinerant missionary who embarks on a journey eastward, propagating a gospel that deeply resonates with ancient Indian imagery and concepts. Such texts, despite their rejection by the early church, subtly intimate a current of spiritual thought far more expansive than the restrictive confines of established orthodoxy. Could the elusive missing years hold the pivotal key to this profound mystery? Could they represent the period during which a Galilean teacher encountered the Bodhisattva path and subsequently integrated and transformed its essence into his own unique ministry? Absolute certainty remains elusive. The profound silence of history resists definitive conclusions. Yet, within that silence, the image gleams with increasing brilliance. Jesus, the compassionate Savior whose divine mission was not to escape worldly suffering, but to fully embrace it. To perceive him in this light is to gain a fresh, profound perspective, not merely as an isolated historical figure confined to a specific locale, but rather as an integral part of a universal tapestry of wisdom. He emerges as a man whose life, whether shaped by direct influence or by a remarkable convergence of spiritual truths, mirrored humanity's deepest yearning for mercy. Perhaps this enduring resonance is precisely why his compelling story continues to captivate hearts and minds across millennia. For much like the Bodhisattva, he is remembered not for seeking personal glorification, but for his selfless act of giving himself entirely away. In every gentle whisper of his parables, in every compassionate act of healing, the profound resonance of compassion endures, an echo that inextricably links the sacred hills of Galilee to the majestic Himalayas, the profound narratives of the Gospel to the timeless wisdom of the Sutra, and the spiritual traditions of the West to the ancient philosophies of the East. Long before the magnificent stone monasteries of Europe began to rise in silent grandeur, the vast, ancient deserts of the Middle East already harbored thriving communities of mystics. These were devout men and women who deliberately withdrew from the clamor of urban life, seeking to discern the divine voice of God amidst the whispers of the wind and the shifting sands. They practiced rigorous fasting, engaged in fervent prayer, observed the celestial dance of the stars, and in their mesmerizing chants, the eternal rhythms of the cosmos seemed to reverberate. Among these dedicated seekers were the Essenes, a distinctive Jewish sect whose sacred writings, remarkably preserved and later discovered in the caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea, elucidated their profound beliefs in purity, prophecy, and an ardent apocalyptic hope. They adhered to a simple way of life, donning unadorned garments, partaking of plain sustenance, and patiently awaiting the arrival of a righteous teacher who would guide them into an enlightened era. Is it plausible that Jesus, during his enigmatic hidden years, may have walked among them? Could the profound silence of their desert existence have profoundly shaped his evolving vision of the impending kingdom of God? Yet beyond the Essenes, the boundless desert stretched infinitely further. In ancient Egypt, dedicated ascetics congregated near the life-giving Nile River, engaging in spiritual disciplines that would subsequently inspire the burgeoning Christian monastic traditions. In the distant lands of Persia and Arabia, wandering sages imparted their profound visions and recited hymns that exalted the sacred concept of unity with the divine. Across these vast, desolate sands, A vibrant tapestry of traders, poets, and mystics traversed, their diverse songs harmonizing into an ethereal, otherworldly chorus. If Jesus indeed embarked on journeys eastward, he would have encountered not only bustling marketplaces and opulent royal courts, but also these solitary, contemplative seekers. One might envision him pausing within a secluded desert monastery, intently listening to prayers whispered against the haunting howl of the wind. Perhaps he heard verses that deeply resonated with his own spiritual convictions, songs that celebrated the triumph of light over encroaching darkness and the ultimate victory of boundless mercy over harsh judgment. Centuries later, the illustrious Sufi poets of the Islamic world would compose verses in tones that possess an eerily familiar resonance. Wherever you turn, there is the face of God, eloquently penned Rumi. Could it be that such profound mystical cadences drew from the very same wellspring of spiritual wisdom that Jesus himself once encountered in the expansive deserts of the East? Or is it that all genuine mystics, gazing into the same profound silence, ultimately describe the same divine presence, albeit in a multitude of different languages? The canonical Gospels recount that prior to the commencement of his public ministry, Jesus retreated into the desolate wilderness for a period of 40 days. Was this merely a test of solitary endurance, or was it the blossoming of spiritual seeds planted much earlier, seeds of profound desert wisdom, of transformative mystical encounters, of ancient chants that continue to drift like ethereal sand through the corridors of time? The vast desert, by its very nature, does not meticulously record the passage of its visitors. Its relentless winds erase footprints as swiftly as they are imprinted. However, the profound memory of these encounters lingers powerfully within the teachings that emerge from those who wander its expanse. Perhaps Jesus' boundless compassion, his unwavering focus on the plight of the poor, and his earnest call to embrace radical simplicity all bear indelible traces of the desert mysticism he absorbed during the years that the Gospels leave conspicuously unspoken. To entertain such a notion is not to diminish his unique spiritual stature, but rather to expand it, to perceive him as an integral part of an immense lineage of spiritual seekers who turned to the profound silence of the sand and, in doing so, discovered a voice far greater than their own. And so the desert remains an integral part of the enigma surrounding the missing years, not as a desolate void, but as a majestic cathedral of silence, where mystics once sang their sacred hymns, and perhaps where Jesus, too, intently listened and absorbed profound truths. Among the most astonishing and defining characteristics of Jesus' ministry were his extraordinary acts of healing. With a mere touch, he miraculously restored sight to the blind. With a single spoken word, he cleansed the afflicted leper. With a simple gesture, he brought solace to the tormented mind. These incredible wonders are meticulously described in the Gospels as divine miracles, serving as powerful manifestations of his inherent divine authority. Yet, some inquiring minds have pondered, could his remarkable gift of healing also reflect an accumulation of profound knowledge acquired during his elusive missing years? In the ancient land of India, the sophisticated science of Ayurveda had already flourished for many centuries. Its dedicated practitioners firmly believed that the human body maintained a delicate balance of vital energies and that genuine healing could be achieved through the judicious application of herbs, carefully prescribed diets, therapeutic massage, and the compassionate laying on of hands. In the remote regions of Tibet, skilled healers practiced intricate rituals involving touch and prayer, harmoniously blending spiritual invocation with meticulous bodily care. Along the historic Silk Road, the advanced principles of Greek medicine gracefully intermingled with diverse Eastern traditions, resulting in a fascinating fusion of practices, encompassing both the practical and the deeply mystical. If Jesus indeed embarked on journeys eastward, could he have diligently studied these ancient healing arts? One might vividly imagine him seated alongside an esteemed Ayurvedic healer, attentively learning the subtle rhythms of the pulse, discerning the precise pressure points of the hand, and mastering the intricate methods to alleviate pain through compassionate touch. Or perhaps he observed the dedicated Tibetan practitioners, invoking profound compassion as they meticulously tended to the sick, seamlessly integrating medical expertise with fervent prayer. These profound encounters may have deeply impressed upon him the fundamental truth that the body and spirit are not disparate entities, but rather intricately interwoven like the delicate threads of a single unified fabric. The Gospels unequivocally emphasize that his miraculous healings were not performed in secretive seclusion, but rather in full public view. Throngs of eager crowds pressed in closely as he gently placed his hands upon the suffering. His touch was consistently devoid of aloofness, never withheld. This profound openness powerfully reflects a universal principle inherent in numerous healing traditions, that the healer must draw near, must willingly embrace the vulnerability of profound compassion. Healing was not merely a technical procedure, but a sacred union of profound presence, spiritual essence, and unwavering care. Some skeptical voices contend that such observed parallels definitively prove nothing, asserting that healing by touch is a common practice across a multitude of diverse cultures, and in this specific assertion, they are indeed correct. However, the profound resonance between these practices undeniably persists. Why did Jesus' healing abilities appear so utterly instinctive, so inextricably interwoven with the very core of his message? Could it be that during those hidden years, he had personally witnessed, and perhaps even actively practiced, similar traditions far removed from the familiar landscapes of Galilee? Whether acquired through diligent learning or divinely revealed, the healing hands of Jesus possessed a profound power that utterly astonished his devoted followers. Yet what remains most enigmatic is not merely the physical act itself, but rather the boundless compassion that animated every single instance of it. In this profound aspect, his ministry once again strikingly resembles Eastern traditions, where genuine healing was never solely concerned with the physical body, but rather with meticulously restoring balance, offering profound comfort, and gently elevating the soul towards an enduring state of peace. Perhaps this constitutes the true underlying secret, that genuine healing invariably arises when love itself is made tangibly manifest, that the sacred laying on of hands is less about precise technique and more about profound presence, the kind of empathetic presence that genuinely perceives suffering, steadfastly refuses to turn away, and channels boundless compassion directly into a healing touch. Whether profoundly shaped by the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda, the spiritual practices of Tibetan medicine, or the unique mystical insights gleaned from the desert's own profound silence, Jesus' healing ministry carried this universal and timeless truth. The enigmatic missing years may indeed conceal the precise origins of his learning, But the Gospels unequivocally reveal how he practiced, openly, generously, without expectation of charge, and without imposing any conditions. And in that boundless generosity, we distinctly hear the powerful echo of a wisdom that may possess deep roots in numerous diverse lands, yet ultimately blossoms in one universal soil, the fertile soil of compassion. When Jesus frequently addressed the gathered throngs, he consistently employed parables, uncomplicated narratives derived from the familiar landscapes of fields, vineyards, and local villages. Yet, beneath their apparent simplicity, recondite enigmas and profound spiritual insights were concealed. The celestial realm, he declared, resembles a mustard seed, a diminutive, nearly imperceptible speck, yet fated to burgeon into a substantial tree offering refuge and sanctuary to myriad birds. For his contemporaneous audience in Galilee, the mustard seed presented a well-known symbol, intrinsically woven into their agricultural existence. However, for scholars immersed in Eastern philosophical traditions, this particular metaphor evokes a distinct reverberation. Within Buddhist and Hindu teachings, seeds frequently represent the latent capabilities residing within every individual, the innate ability for spiritual awakening, interred much like an ember within the very soil of the heart. The Lotus Sutra, a preeminent Buddhist text, vividly illustrates this concept. The lotus, emerging from the depths of mire, blossoms forth unsullied and luminous, serving as a profound reflection of the spirit's concealed efflorescence and ultimate purity. One might ponder whether Jesus' parables contained reverberations of such profound imagery, possibly assimilated during his undocumented years. It is conceivable that the mustard seed transcended mere regional specificity, acting instead as a metaphorical conduit, connecting sophisticated Eastern metaphors with the commonplace Galilean landscape. It could represent a recollection of doctrines and spiritual insights discovered during journeys on distant roads. If this hypothesis holds true, then his narratives were not merely straightforward instructions for agrarian workers and fishermen, but rather intricate vessels conveying profound knowledge and ancient wisdom from faraway, culturally rich lands. Indeed, the very parables themselves appear to possess an ecumenical character, transcending cultural boundaries. One might reflect upon the narrative of the prodigal son, embraced upon his return with profound empathy and unconditional love. This poignant story harmonizes strikingly with Buddhist accounts of errant adherents who, having strayed, ultimately rediscover and return to the righteous course of Dharma. Similarly, the parable of the pearl of great price, wherein an individual divests oneself of all worldly possessions to acquire that which possesses genuine and lasting significance, mirrors ancient Hindu tales of ascetics who deliberately forsake material riches in their quest to unearth the invaluable treasure of the spirit. Furthermore, the pedagogical approach employed by Jesus appears strikingly analogous to methods utilized in the East. The Buddha, for example, frequently discoursed through allegories, offering narratives that artfully veiled profound verities within accessible simplicity. Both revered teachers presented their wisdom in the form of enigmatic questions and intricate parables, thereby encouraging profound contemplation and inviting the listener to awaken insight not solely through direct instruction, but primarily through introspective thought and personal reflection. One is compelled to question whether this remarkable similarity could arise merely by chance, or if it might intimate a confluence of shared traditions encountered during the silent, undocumented period of Jesus' life, often referred to as his missing years. Naturally, no extant ancient manuscript directly attests that Jesus pursued studies in the ancient lands of India or Tibet. Similarly, no canonical gospel account explicitly documents the appropriation of Oriental allegories or philosophical concepts. Nevertheless, the pervasive symbolism of germination, valuable acquisitions, and concealed development found within his teachings feels as if it is not exclusively indigenous to Galilee, but rather an integral part of an expansive continuum of global wisdom traditions. Perhaps this inherent universality is precisely why his pronouncements feel so enduring and perennial, demonstrating an remarkable ability to transcend cultural boundaries and historical epochs, consistently resonating deeply and evoking profound emotional responses in hearts situated far from their initial historical and geographical setting. The concealed kernels embedded within his parables may therefore function as a potent symbolic representation, not merely for the kingdom of heaven, but equally for the very tapestry of history itself. Within the profound silence of his undocumented years, imperceptible seeds might well have been planted, nascent elements of boundless compassion, profound humility, and expansive universal wisdom. When the opportune moment arrived, these seeds flowered magnificently into narratives so remarkably straightforward that even a child could readily grasp their surface meaning, yet simultaneously so recondite and multi-layered that erudite individuals and theologians continue to grapple with their intricate depths and enduring implications today. Perhaps this constitutes the most profound enigma of all human experience, that verity, akin to a germinating kernel, does not immediately manifest its complete essence or entire scope. Instead, it patiently bides its time, remaining interred in obscurity and silence, awaiting the propitious instant for its gradual unfolding, growth, and ultimate maturation into full comprehension. Among the venerable manuscripts that, for various reasons, never found a place within the established canon of the Bible, lies a particularly intriguing document, the Gospel of Thomas. Unearthed from the desert soil of Egypt during the middle decades of the 20th century, this remarkable text offers not the conventional narratives of miracles and crucifixion familiar from other Gospels, but rather a compendium of concise, perplexing, and frequently esoteric aphorisms attributed to Jesus. Its very introductory words serve as an invitation, beckoning the interpreter towards a veiled understanding and promising a profound spiritual reward. Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Thomas, famously referred to as the reputed doppelganger of Jesus, is portrayed in subsequent lore as an ardent evangelist journeying eastward. Various ancient legends even situate him specifically in Hindustan, where he is said to have proclaimed the message, performed numerous curative acts, and established enduring Christian congregations that persisted for numerous eras. His eponymous gospel, notably devoid of sequential storytelling and overt theological exposition, approximates more closely the style and philosophical depth of Oriental sapiential texts than the formalized chronicles of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It unfurls as a series of enigmatic exchanges and profound riddles, each utterance necessitating profound reflection and personal interpretation from the reader. To illustrate, consider one profound aphorism from this text: "The kingdom of God is inside you, and it is outside you. These words reverberate with the intensity and paradoxical nature of a Buddhist koan, effectively dissolving the conventional demarcation between the inner subjective experience and the outer objective reality, between the individual self and the expansive world. Another saying declares, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." This directly mirrors Vedic and Buddhist concepts regarding the igniting of the inherent divine spark or spiritual essence concealed deep within every individual. The overarching emphasis, therefore, rests not upon adherence to prescribed outward regulations or external dogma, but rather upon internal revelation and self-discovery, a foundational leitmotif that permeates Oriental thought as unequivocally as it does this rediscovered sacred text. It is a compelling question whether the Gospel of Thomas might safeguard remnants of teachings that were significantly molded and refined during Jesus' undocumented years. If, hypothetically, Jesus did indeed travel towards the Orient, and if he articulated concepts that were profoundly influenced or colored by Eastern philosophical thought, then it is plausible that such reverberations and subtle inflections persisted within this very document. These teachings could have been faithfully transmitted by disciples who distinctly remembered and valued a more esoteric and inwardly focused dimension of his overarching message, one that diverged from later canonical interpretations. The prevailing ecclesiastical establishment of the nascent Christian era, however, found the Gospel of Thomas profoundly disconcerting. Unlike the canonical Gospels, this text offered no narrative of resurrection, no chronicle of supernatural feats, and no explicit framework for ecclesiastical governance or institutional authority. Instead, it exhorted spiritual aspirants to engage in deep introspection, encouraging them to look within themselves to discover the inherent divine illumination already present. Such a radical emphasis on personal inward discovery imperiled the burgeoning ecclesiastical body, which vigorously endeavored to ground its dominion and control in a structured episcopacy, formalized doctrinal statements, and prescribed liturgical practices. To unequivocally declare that the kingdom resided within each individual was, effectively, to make the established hierarchy and its intermediaries superfluous. Consequently, Thomas's gospel was concealed and interred beneath the desert terrain of Nag Hammadi for many epochs, until its eventual re-emergence and rediscovery. Yet, the very persistence of this text resonates like a faint echo emerging from the unspoken annals of the past, a compelling intimation that the narrative of Christ encompassed a greater multiplicity and broader scope than the rigidly defined canon permits. The portrayal of Thomas journeying to Hindustan, a persistent legend, is especially provocative. If this account proves accurate, he would have conveyed with him not merely the cherished recollection of Jesus' teachings, but perhaps also the profound impact of concepts and spiritual insights that Jesus himself had personally assimilated throughout his peregrinations towards the Orient. One might then inquire whether the ancient communities known as Thomas Christians in Hindustan might preserve a subtle vestige of this profound cultural and spiritual exchange, serving as a palpable living trace of those enigmatic hidden years. Ultimately, we are unable to ascertain these possibilities with absolute certainty. The Gospel of the Twin, in its very essence, continues to be an enigma, a compendium of aphorisms that consistently engender more profound inquiries than they offer definitive resolutions. Yet, perhaps, this inherent ambiguity is precisely its intended purpose. Much like a compelling parable or a challenging koan, its true merit resides not in providing definitive pronouncements or straightforward answers, but rather in stimulating critical thought and profound questions. It profoundly invites us to contemplate what lies beyond the historical lacuna, prompting us to envision a Christ whose profound utterances might find a spiritual home as readily within the hallowed confines of a monastic dwelling in Egypt as within the sacred edifice of a temple in India. Perhaps upon deeper reflection, the true doppelganger alluded to in this gospel is not the Apostle Thomas himself, but rather the resonant echo of an entirely different spiritual tradition, an Oriental counterpart to the Occidental faith. This alternative wisdom, conceived in obscurity and born in silence, was potentially transported along unremembered pathways and across vast distances, now patiently awaiting its reemergence and rediscovery by those discerning individuals courageous enough to perceive its subtle whispers and profound implications. There exists an inherent peril in positing the notion that Jesus might have journeyed beyond the traditional confines of Judea. Such an idea profoundly destabilizes the foundational tenets of established religious doctrine, because it delineates an image of the Messiah not as a singular, insular, divine intervention, but rather as an inquisitive seeker profoundly influenced and shaped by extensive peregrinations through alien territories and diverse cultures. For certain individuals, such an expansive vision of Christ is perceived as deeply emancipatory, broadening spiritual horizons. Conversely, for others, it is inherently menacing, threatening the familiar structures of belief. Indeed, this concept was so profoundly threatening that any narratives pertaining to these purported travels may have been deliberately muted, systematically quelled, or vehemently denounced as heterodoxy. During the nascent epochs of the ecclesiastical institution, the cohesion and doctrinal unity of the burgeoning Christian faith proved exceptionally tenuous. Numerous rival scriptural accounts, often referred to as Gospels, propagated widely, each presenting a distinct portrayal and interpretation of Jesus' life and teachings. Some of these spoke of esoteric aphorisms, others delved into cosmic mysteries, and still others detailed peregrinations never explicitly recorded in the eventually authorized scriptures. To effectively forestall doctrinal schism and maintain a semblance of control, ecclesiastical leaders and synods meticulously deliberated, ultimately choosing which texts would be officially retained and which would be definitively rejected and cast aside from the emerging canon. Narratives depicting Jesus in India or Tibet, had they been accepted, would have fundamentally undermined the prevailing assertion that divine revelation was a singular, unique divine bestowal intrinsically anchored within the geographical and cultural confines of Galilee and Jerusalem. It is, after all, demonstrably more convenient for institutions to construct and maintain their dominion upon a persona meticulously confined within established borders. A Christ who is exclusively indigenous to Judea, who articulates solely within the paradigm of Hebrew prophecy and its fulfillment, seamlessly conforms to a streamlined and controllable theological framework. However, a Christ who journeys amidst adherents of Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism, that Christ profoundly intimates an ecumenical persona, one who rises above proprietary claims and whose transformative message cannot be exclusively controlled or monopolized by any single religious institution. For ecclesiastical institutions that vigorously endeavored to exert dominion and establish singular authority, such an expansive, universalistic vision of Christ proved profoundly hazardous. Consequently, narratives of these prescribed peregrinations devolved into mere whispers and unsubstantiated rumors. Ancient traditional accounts of Asa in the Himalayan region of Ladakh, of Uz Asaf in the Kashmiri Valley, and of doctrines imparted in the ancient land of Persia, these intriguing stories persistently remained at the periphery of accepted narratives, summarily rejected, or perhaps even intentionally obscured. To concede their veracity would have been to recognize that Christian faith constituted not an exclusive divine disclosure, but rather an integral component of an expansive current of sapience, flowing continuously across the global landscape of spiritual traditions. The systematic quelling and marginalization of divergent narratives is by no means exclusive to the Christian faith. Indeed, historical chronicles abound with instances of monarchs and clerics who meticulously demarcated the parameters of verity, proclaiming a singular, authorized account as sacrosanct, while branding all others as perilous or heretical. Yet such imposed demarcations are ultimately powerless to stifle the enduring human capacity for creative thought and spiritual inquiry. Across numerous centuries, intrepid seekers have consistently returned to the profound silence of Jesus' missing years, intuitively sensing that what was deliberately forbidden or suppressed might, in fact, hold the most profound and illuminating disclosures. One might provocatively speculate, what if the lacuna within the sacred texts regarding Jesus' formative years is not a mere oversight or an instance of historical ignorance, but rather a deliberate design? What if those blank years were purposefully left void so that the overarching narrative could be meticulously sculpted into something ordered, manageable, and exclusively confined? If this hypothesis holds true, then the faint rumors and persistent whispers of Jesus' purported peregrinations eastward may represent not mere conjecture, but valuable vestiges of a more encompassing verity. A truth deemed by those in power to be excessively comprehensive and universalistic, to be safely incorporated into the official doctrine. It is a curious phenomenon that prescribed peregrinations, those journeys deemed unacceptable or heretical, frequently persist most enduringly within mythical narratives and popular legends. They persevere not primarily due to empirical validation or historical proof, but rather because they appeal to a profound, innate understanding within the human spirit. The intuition that sapience is not circumscribed by human constructs, that verity is not delimited by geographical boundaries or doctrinal edicts, and that the existence of Christ might have been considerably more extensive and universally resonant than ecclesiastical authorities permitted or were willing to acknowledge. When narratives surface concerning a figure known as Isa in the secluded monasteries of Tibet, or Uz Asaf in the verdant valleys of Kashmir, or even hints of concealed ancient manuscripts within the remote region of Ladakh, one apprehends not merely anecdotal accounts, but rather the resonant reverberation of historical concealment. The sheer vehemence with which such narratives were historically disavowed or vehemently refuted powerfully indicates their inherent capacity to challenge and destabilize prevailing doctrines. Indeed, what entity could pose a more profound threat to entrenched authority than a messianic figure, a Christ, whose divine provenance extends beyond the confines of a single geopolitical territory, embracing instead the entirety of global humanity? The lacunae found within historical records are seldom devoid of underlying intent. Indeed, that which remains unarticulated frequently divulges insights as significant as any explicit declaration. Consequently, the enigmatic period encompassing the missing years of Jesus ought not to be perceived as a mere lacuna in scholarly understanding. Instead, it might well signify a deliberate void, a temporal segment over which dominant powers elected to cast an opaque veil. For, should it be definitively established that Jesus undertook extensive journeys beyond the familiar landscapes of Judea, and if his profound wisdom was genuinely honed through intellectual exchanges with venerable sages in distant Persia, the spiritual heartlands of India, or the mystical highlands of Tibet, then the foundational authority of the nascent Christian Church would undoubtedly confront an overwhelming and existential challenge. The formidable influence wielded by the ecclesiastical institution was fundamentally predicated upon the unparalleled singularity of its divine revelation. The assertion that Jesus Christ's spiritual and intellectual formation occurred exclusively within the hallowed traditions of Israel served a crucial strategic purpose, enabling religious leaders to firmly affix his narrative to an unbroken lineage of ancient prophecy and its subsequent fulfillment. This carefully constructed framework effectively concentrated interpretive power into the hands of those who possessed the exclusive prerogative to decipher sacred scripture, individuals who, by their own decree, positioned themselves as the sole custodians and promulgators of an unassailable singular truth. Conversely, if the profound teachings articulated by Jesus were discovered to have assimilated tenets from disparate spiritual reservoirs, if, for instance, his pronouncements resonated with the philosophical echoes of Buddhism, the ethical tenets of Zoroastrianism, or the intricate spiritual insights of Hindu mysticism, then the very concept of divine revelation would transcend its confinement to a solitary religious tradition. Instead, it would become the shared inheritance of all humanity. Such an expansive and inclusive theological perspective, while inherently enriching, simultaneously presents a significant existential threat to established structures. Institutional frameworks, by their very nature, flourish through the meticulous demarcation of boundaries, rigidly defining what constitutes inside versus outside, or truth versus falsehood. A messianic figure, a Jesus, whose spiritual evolution was profoundly influenced by extensive foreign journeys and cross-cultural encounters, irrevocably dismantles these carefully erected distinctions. He emerges as a truly universal archetype, inherently untamed by dogma, and ultimately uncontainable by any singular ecclesiastical dominion. For those individuals intent on constructing and maintaining a rigid ecclesiastical hierarchy, such an all-encompassing universality represented an undeniable peril. It is remarkably instructive that a multitude of apocryphal gospels, texts deliberately excluded from the officially sanctioned canon, conspicuously accentuate precisely those doctrinal components that fundamentally undermine established authority. These alternative narratives frequently allude to esoteric or hidden knowledge, emphasize the inherent presence of a divine spark residing within every individual, and portray a spiritual kingdom not subject to the dominion of an ecclesiastical priesthood, but rather one to be intimately discovered through profound introspection and inner spiritual revelation. The acceptance of Jesus having undertaken extensive global peregrinations would, by direct implication, necessitate the concession that wisdom itself cannot be exclusively monopolized by any single group or tradition. Such an acknowledgement would signify a profound recognition that the divine essence communicates through a multitude of diverse voices, emanating from a plurality of geographical regions and cultural contexts. It is conceivable, therefore, that this constitutes the fundamental reason why the enigmatic missing years persist in their shroud of profound silence. This omission was not due to their perceived insignificance, but rather precisely because they possessed an overwhelming importance. Their disclosure could have potentially led to the complete dissolution of the delicate foundational structure of early Christian orthodoxy. It was deemed preferable, then, to leave that particular historical scroll conspicuously blank, to purposefully excise those formative years, and to permit the deliberate imposition of silence to effectively accomplish the task of profound concealment. Nevertheless, such pervasive historical silence inherently serves to ignite an insatiable curiosity. Throughout the unfolding of centuries, earnest spiritual seekers have intently scrutinized that conspicuous historical void, daring to pose the very questions once considered anathema. What if this undocumented period of Jesus' life contains the pivotal insights, the crucial intellectual and spiritual developments that underpin his profoundly universal vision? What if the very individual renowned for expounding upon the simple beauty of lilies and the provident care for sparrows also, at some point, lent an attentive ear to the meditative chants of monastic orders, absorbed the sacred hymns intoned by Zoroastrian magi, and engaged with the profound wisdom offered by peripatetic mystics from distant lands? Thus, while institutional power undoubtedly endeavored to suppress this compelling narrative, the resultant historical silence paradoxically transformed into a fecund breeding ground for human imagination. Legends, vibrant and diverse, proliferated like wildflowers across this uncharted historical expanse, each offering an evocative glimpse of a messianic figure, a Jesus whose spiritual allegiance extended beyond the narrow confines of a single nation, embracing instead the entirety of the global populace. It is perhaps for this very reason that the enigma persists, for it subtly intimates a profound truth that transcends the limitations of temporal power, surpasses the rigidity of established dogma, and cannot be circumscribed by the boundaries of any singular geographical map or canonical gospel account. Far from diminishing his profound narrative, the missing years may, in fact, serve to immeasurably strengthen it, for they compellingly suggest that the Christ figure familiar to us was molded not exclusively by the serene hills of Galilee, but rather by the vast and diverse tapestry of the wider world, thereby carrying forth a message of universal resonance that reverberates profoundly across every distinct culture, every spiritual conviction, and every corner of the earth. If the mere contemplation of Jesus undertaking journeys eastward already profoundly disquiets the conventional imagination, what then is to be made of the faint, persistent whispers suggesting his possible peregrinations extended even further, traversing vast oceans to arrive in the distant, ancient lands of the Americas? For a great many, this proposition seems utterly improbable, a legendary narrative extended beyond all credible bounds. Nevertheless, scattered indigenous traditions found within the historical regions of Mesoamerica and the towering Andes mountain range distinctly recall figures whose characteristics bear a striking resemblance to the Christ. This congruity is so pronounced that some scholars and mystics have earnestly pondered whether these cultural echoes might, in fact, conceal the memory of a profound, yet long forgotten, transatlantic encounter. Within the rich oral traditions of the Nahua and Maya peoples of Central America, compelling narratives recount the advent of an extraordinary teacher known as Quetzalcoatl, often revered as the feathered serpent. This revered figure was depicted as arriving not in the guise of a conquering warrior, but rather as a benevolent purveyor of profound wisdom and enlightenment. He was consistently described as possessing fair skin, a distinguished beard, and garments of pristine white. And notably, he vehemently opposed the practice of human sacrifice. Quetzalcoatl imparted invaluable lessons on the principles of peace, advanced agricultural techniques, and the flourishing of the arts, after which he mysteriously departed, leaving behind a solemn promise of his eventual return. Similarly, spanning the vast expanse of the Andes, the venerable Inca civilization preserved accounts of Viracocha, a towering bearded personage who ostensibly emerged from beyond the distant seas. This enigmatic figure was credited with disseminating profound wisdom, miraculously healing the afflicted, and ultimately vanishing mysteriously into the western horizon. For certain analytical observers, these striking parallels represent nothing more than mere fortuitous coincidence, or perhaps the retrospective imposition of later Christian theological influence onto indigenous narratives. Yet, a considerable number of others are compelled to ponder a more intriguing possibility. Could these be fragmented echoes of ancient memory, subtly altered and reinterpreted over countless centuries, pertaining to a peripatetic teacher who courageously navigated the vast oceanic expanses long before the historic voyages of Columbus ever commenced? Skeptical voices frequently contend that such an arduous transatlantic journey would have been utterly beyond the technological capabilities of ancient times. However, historical evidence strongly suggests that ancient seafaring was considerably more sophisticated and capable than contemporary popular imagination often permits. Ancient Phoenician and Egyptian mariners, for instance, possessed an intimate understanding of the intricate rhythms and prevailing currents of the open sea. Roman merchants routinely navigated their vessels to India, expertly utilizing the predictable patterns of the monsoon winds. Furthermore, the intrepid Polynesians successfully traversed thousands of miles of vast ocean, guided solely by their profound knowledge of celestial navigation and the subtle movements of ocean waves. If these diverse cultures could accomplish such astonishing voyages, the question then arises, why could not a singularly determined spiritual seeker have been transported by resourceful traders or devout pilgrims across forgotten oceanic pathways? The profound, mysterious gravitas attributed to these compelling narratives derives not from irrefutable empirical proof, but rather from their astonishing thematic resemblances. A benevolent figure embodying profound compassion, explicitly opposed to the practice of ritualistic bloodshed, consistently remembered as both a miraculous healer and an enlightened guide, and always associated with a solemn pledge of future reappearance. These are powerful narrative motifs that resonate with profound depth alongside the core tenets of the gospel story. Yet they manifest independently within indigenous cultures geographically isolated from the sacred precincts of the Holy Land. This striking congruence compels contemplation. Are these merely universal archetypes, spontaneously emerging from humanity's innate, pervasive longing for tranquility and spiritual harmony? Or might they subtly intimate a momentous encounter that the established annals of history, for various reasons, elected not to meticulously preserve. Even within the distinctive theological traditions of the Latter-day Saints residing in America, there exists a compelling assertion that subsequent to his miraculous resurrection, Christ personally visited the indigenous peoples of the New World, imparting his teachings to them with the same profound wisdom and grace he had demonstrated in Galilee. While this particular belief unequivocally resides beyond the parameters of mainstream historical consensus, it nevertheless powerfully encapsulates a persistent, recurring thematic aspiration: the profound human yearning to perceive Jesus not as a figure geographically constrained to a singular landmass, but rather as an omnipresent, universal traveler, manifesting his compassionate presence wherever genuine human need and spiritual succor are required. The intriguing echoes resonating from the Americas, therefore, are akin to ethereal melodies borne upon the shifting currents of the wind. While definitive empirical proof linking them directly to him remains elusive, their thematic cadence possesses a haunting and unmistakable familiarity. They serve as a poignant reminder that profound narratives often traverse greater distances than physical bodies, and that collective memory frequently extends its reach across vast oceanic expanses, undergoing subtle transformations and reconfigurations within new linguistic and cultural frameworks. It is entirely plausible that Jesus never physically trod upon the soil of the Americas. It is equally conceivable that the revered figures of Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha are independent mythic creations, potent archetypes spontaneously generated by the boundless depths of the human spirit. Nevertheless, the persistent and striking resemblances serve to perpetually hold open the portal of wonder and speculative inquiry. For what if the historically undocumented years of his early life, and indeed even the enigmatic period subsequent to his resurrection, encompass a series of profound and unimaginable journeys? These could be epic peregrinations across vast, arid deserts, over formidable, towering mountain ranges, and perhaps even spanning immense, uncharted oceans, consequently leaving behind subtle, fragmented vestiges of memory embedded in remote locales where conventional historical inquiry has hitherto neglected to cast its gaze. Deep within the venerable legends originating from the high plateaus of Tibet and the vast expanses of Central Asia resides an ethereal realm, so profoundly concealed and inherently elusive that its very essence has transcended mere geographical location to become an potent symbol, Shambhala. This mythical domain is consistently depicted as a veritable paradise of profound wisdom, a pristine kingdom utterly untouched by the corrosive forces of worldly corruption. Its existence is referenced in ancient Buddhist and Hindu scriptures, wherein it is portrayed as an inviolable sanctuary, where universal truth persists in its most unblemished purity. Its fabled gates, according to lore, remain hermetically sealed against the spiritually undeserving, yet are said to swing open readily for those individuals who earnestly pursue enlightenment with an undefiled and sincere heart. Could it be that the undocumented missing years of Jesus' life somehow converged with this most enigmatic and profound of ancient myths? Certain intrepid thinkers have indeed ventured to entertain such an audacious query. For if he genuinely undertook an arduous journey into the formidable Himalayan range, if he engaged in profound spiritual discourse with venerable monks and esoteric mystics within the secluded enclaves of Tibet, then it is conceivable that the compelling legend of Shambhala might have irresistibly beckoned him even deeper into those recondite valleys where spiritual adepts fervently believed the world's most profound and ancient wisdom was meticulously safeguarded and perpetually sustained. Shambhala is traditionally described as being governed by a lineage of enlightened monarchs, revered custodians of sacred, esoteric knowledge who discreetly guide the spiritual evolution of humanity. Its precise geographical coordinates remain perpetually elusive. Its location is sometimes posited within the majestic, snow-capped mountains of Tibet, at other times amidst the expansive, windswept deserts of Mongolia, and occasionally in mystical realms accessible solely through profound, visionary experiences. For centuries, intrepid travelers and spiritual adventurers have assiduously sought this legendary kingdom, with some claiming fleeting glimpses of its resplendent cities, purportedly concealed by towering, pristine snow peaks or shrouded mysteriously within swirling clouds. One might compellingly envision Jesus, the profound spiritual seeker, irresistibly drawn by the subtle, pervasive whispers of such an extraordinary domain, a mythical land where profound wisdom was not merely dispersed, but meticulously consolidated, where the principle of boundless compassion served as the supreme governing law, where immutable truth was vigilantly protected as an invaluable, sacred treasure. If he indeed discovered this fabled realm, or even if he merely absorbed its powerful, inspiring legend, could its transcendent vision have profoundly influenced and indelibly shaped his own nascent conceptualization of the kingdom of heaven? The discernible parallels between these two profound visions are undeniably striking. Shambhala is consistently portrayed as a sublime realm where the principles of absolute justice and boundless mercy hold supreme dominion, where all forms of suffering are alleviated and healed, and where immutable truth endures eternally, transcending the ephemeral constraints of time. The kingdom of God, as elucidated by Jesus, bears a remarkably similar spiritual resonance, not an authoritarian, distant empire of temporal power, but rather an immanent, hidden reality already subtly permeating and manifesting within the terrestrial world, discernible exclusively by those individuals endowed with spiritual discernment and the capacity to truly perceive. It is conceivable that Shambhala and the kingdom of heaven represent two distinct, yet complementary, reflective surfaces, each mirroring the profound, perennial longing inherent within the human spirit, the universal aspiration for a world made spiritually and socially complete. If this speculative premise holds true, then the historically undocumented missing years of Jesus' life may well have constituted the pivotal period during which such profound spiritual mirrors were momentarily glimpsed, a time when the expansive philosophical visions of the East harmoniously converged and blended with the fervent spiritual hopes of the West within the formative consciousness of a young teacher meticulously preparing for his momentous divine mission. Unwavering skeptics will undoubtedly assert that Shambhala is nothing more than a fanciful myth, a mere fabrication of human imagination. However, it is a profound characteristic of myths that they often possess an uncanny ability to allude to deeper, more fundamental truths that transcend the empirical limitations of recorded history. They serve as profound revelations of humanity's deepest yearnings, articulating that which the collective human consciousness intuitively senses must exist somewhere, if not tangibly upon the terrestrial plane, then assuredly within the boundless realms of the spirit. And so, the intriguing possibility endures that the Messiah of Galilee may have, in his formative years, subtly encountered the compelling myth of Shambhala, subsequently incorporating its profound vision into his own transformative proclamation of a hidden, spiritual kingdom. Whether or not he ever truly journeyed into such an ethereal domain, the profound congruence between these disparate concepts impels us to contemplate if ultimate wisdom resides less in geographical coordinates and more in an intrinsic spiritual resonance, an arcane inner sanctuary mirrored in ancient narratives across the globe. In this profound sense, Shambhala transcends its literal interpretation as a concealed territory, becoming instead a potent emblem of Jesus' own unrecorded epoch, a period uncharted by conventional history, shrouded in enigma, yet radiating with boundless promise, serving as a poignant reminder that periods of profound silence may not signify absence, but rather a profound, hidden paradise. The hallowed Gospels recount that upon the nativity of Jesus, venerable sages arrived from the distant east, magi, guided by a celestial beacon, who reverently presented precious offerings of gold, frankincense, and myrrh before the infant in Bethlehem. Their sacred mission fulfilled, they quietly receded to their ancestral lands. Yet, what if this seminal narrative did not conclude there? What if, in the intervening years, the trajectory of that initial journey was profoundly inverted? What if the mature Jesus, in his unchronicled adulthood, subsequently embarked upon a quest for the very homeland of these wise men, retracing the ancient pathways of those who had first bestowed honor upon him? In the venerable Persian tradition, the Magi were far more than mere peregrinators. They were esteemed priests of Zoroastrianism, dedicated guardians of the perpetual sacred flame, and astute interpreters of cosmic constellations. Their profound theological framework, encompassing a grand cosmic struggle between the forces of illumination and shadow, their eloquent hymns extolling veracity and equity, and their fervent veneration for the divine fire. All these profound tenets resonated through their ancient temples, meticulously preserved and protected across countless centuries. Imagine, if you will, Jesus during his hidden years, deliberately embarking on an arduous eastward pilgrimage to seek the very land from which his earliest, most revered visitors had originated. In such an extraordinary expedition, a profound historical and spiritual arc would achieve its closure. A guiding star had once led the Magi westward to his birthplace. Now, perhaps, the subtle, inexorable whisper of destiny beckoned him eastward, drawing him into the very cradle of their ancient wisdom. Could he have stood within the hallowed precincts of a fire temple, observing the eternal flame ascend skyward, listening intently to ancient chants that articulated the ultimate triumph of truth over mendacity? Could he have engaged in profound intellectual discourse with esteemed Magi scholars concerning the prophesied advent of a savior, the Saoshyant destined to usher in a renewal of the world at the culmination of time? The striking parallels between these ancient Persian tenets and Jesus' own subsequent teachings are remarkably profound. Persia, strategically positioned as a pivotal bridge connecting diverse civilizations, functioned as a vibrant crucible where a multitude of philosophical and spiritual concepts dynamically converged. Flourishing Jewish communities thrived within its borders, steadfastly preserving their ancestral faith since the Babylonian exile. Buddhist monks had already commenced disseminating their profound doctrines along the bustling caravan routes. Philosophers, skilled physicians, and astute astrologers frequently convened in its sophisticated royal courts. For an earnest seeker of enlightenment, it represented an unparalleled treasury of accumulated wisdom, a unique geographical nexus where the resonant voices of both East and West harmoniously mingled in the very atmosphere. If Jesus indeed undertook such a journey to this intellectual crossroads, he might well have absorbed the profound sense of cosmic struggle that subsequently imbued his own doctrines. The compelling vision of divine light piercing through spiritual darkness, of absolute truth, liberating humanity from its existential shackles. Perhaps even his distinctive metaphorical language of a kingdom not of this world found a profound echo in the Magi's eschatological anticipation of a glorious age yet to unfold. However, irrespective of whether he embarked on this journey physically or merely existed within the realm of speculative narrative, the compelling notion of the Magi's reciprocal return carries immense symbolic weight. It serves as a powerful reminder that the overarching narrative of Jesus was never rigidly confined to a single geographical locale. From the very moment of his miraculous birth, the spiritual trajectories of the East and West were inextricably intertwined. The enigmatic silence encompassing his unrecorded years may very well conceal the ongoing continuation of that profound thread, a hidden, reciprocal exchange between the humble region of Galilee and the distant, mystical land of Persia, between the innocent child who once received sacred gifts and the discerning man who may have sought the very homeland of his original benefactors in return. No canonical scripture explicitly chronicles such an epic journey. No ancient scroll unequivocally confirms its veracity, yet the tantalizing possibility endures, shimmering like a distant star in the nocturnal firmament, remote, profoundly mysterious, and stubbornly refusing to wane. For what narrative arc could be more intrinsically fitting than for the very individual once honored by the venerated Magi to one day personally traverse the ancient roads of Persia, thereby completing a narrative circle far too expansive and profound to be solely contained within the geographical confines of Judea alone. To conceive of Jesus as a seasoned traveler to distant foreign lands has historically been to embrace a narrative deemed perilously subversive for much of recorded history. For countless centuries, such audacious suggestions would not merely provoke academic discourse. They could incite severe ecclesiastical condemnation, involuntary exile, or even the ultimate penalty of immolation. To postulate that the Messiah might have acquired profound wisdom from the sagacious masters of India, Persia, or Tibet was to implicitly suggest that divine enlightenment was not exclusively channeled through a singular revelation, a solitary scripture, or a monolithic church. And that revolutionary idea fundamentally threatened the very bedrock of established religious authority. The nascent Christian church diligently and tirelessly endeavored to meticulously guard and standardize its foundational narrative. Ecumenical councils were convened specifically to delineate which sacred texts were deemed acceptable and which dissenting voices were to be systematically suppressed. Apocryphal gospels, esoteric mystical sayings, and legends recounting distant travels were summarily dismissed, marginalized, and unequivocally branded as heresy. In its zealous pursuit of theological unity, the Church stringently insisted upon a singular, authorized storyline. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, nurtured in Nazareth, baptized in the Jordan, crucified in Jerusalem, and triumphantly resurrected. Nothing more. Nothing beyond these sanctioned events. But what if a more expansive reality existed? What if ancient scrolls meticulously preserved in remote Ladakh, enigmatic tombs nestled in Kashmir, or whispered traditions circulating within Persian fire temples safeguarded fragments of an altogether different narrative? A compelling story where Jesus' formative spiritual development was shaped not solely by the familiar landscapes of Galilee, but by extensive journeys across the vast and ancient world. Such a revolutionary tale would render him universally accessible, belonging not exclusively to one religious institution, but to the entirety of humanity. It would inherently dissolve rigid geographical and doctrinal borders, compel a re-examination of established hierarchies, and profoundly blur the conventional lines of orthodoxy. That, precisely, is why it was deemed so dangerous. Dangerous not because it was inherently false, but because it was inherently uncontrollable. A Jesus who had traversed the legendary Silk Road could not be confined within the ecclesiastical or political fortifications of Rome or Constantinople. A Messiah who had engaged in profound philosophical debates with Buddhist monks could not be exclusively claimed by one religious tradition alone. His universal story would belong equally to the spiritual heritage of both East and West, resonating deeply with every earnest seeker who sincerely followed the path of profound compassion and enlightenment. Even in subsequent historical epochs, merely to articulate the possibility of these journeys was to inevitably invite profound suspicion and censure. Explorers who boldly asserted having discovered ancient scrolls detailing the life of Isa were publicly ridiculed and discredited. Scholars who diligently drew compelling parallels between the foundational tenets of Christianity and Buddhism were summarily dismissed as impractical dreamers. Indigenous stories of Uz Asaf in Kashmir, suggesting a connection to Jesus, were vehemently denounced as blasphemy by those who steadfastly adhered to the rigidly canonical narrative. Yet, despite relentless suppression, this dangerous story remarkably persists. It persists precisely because silence is never truly empty. The historical lacuna of the missing years inherently demands explanation, and the boundless imagination of humanity instinctively fills these voids with narratives so profoundly compelling that they defy erasure. Perhaps the true danger inherent in these stories lies not in what they might ultimately reveal about the historical Jesus, but rather in what they profoundly reveal about us. That we, as humanity, deeply yearn for a spiritual Savior who transcends all artificial divisions, who speaks universally to every culture, and who cannot be monopolized by any single creed or ecclesiastical council. The narrative of the missing years remains unwritten, yet the profound, transformative danger of their latent possibilities continues to linger. For in every faint whisper of a Jesus who might have journeyed eastward, established power structures invariably feel their very foundations tremble. And in that very tremor, the ancient story regenerates, becoming vibrantly alive once more. Dangerous, not because it seeks to dismantle faith, but precisely because it possesses the capacity to profoundly expand and deepen it. The pervasive silence surrounding Jesus' missing years is certainly not an accidental occurrence. It endures with a profound weight that feels undeniably deliberate, as if history itself has consciously undertaken the solemn responsibility of guarding its deepest secret. Why then does this enigmatic silence persist with such tenacity, despite millennia of fervent speculation? Despite myriad legends meticulously scattered across the vast spiritual landscapes of India, Tibet, and Persia? One compelling explanation resides in the inherent nature of power dynamics. The Gospels, meticulously shaped and compiled in the first century, were never originally conceived as comprehensive biographical accounts. Rather, they functioned primarily as theological portraits, artfully crafted to affirm and solidify belief rather than to satiate mere historical curiosity. The judicious editors of early Christianity chose their words with extreme circumspection, deliberately emphasizing pivotal events such as the birth, baptism, crucifixion, and resurrection. Events that critically anchored ecclesiastical authority and powerfully reinforced prophetic fulfillments. To introduce narratives of eastward journeys or acknowledge influences from foreign sages would have irrevocably unsettled this carefully constructed theological framework. Thus, strategic silence likely presented itself as the more pragmatic and unifying choice. However, silence possesses yet another profound function. It inherently invites mystery. What remains hidden often becomes far more alluring and captivating than what is explicitly articulated. The 18 unrecorded years of Jesus' life are akin to a sealed, arcane chamber, irresistibly drawing earnest seekers to imagine the profound truths that might lie concealed within. For some, this historical lacuna serves as definitive proof that nothing particularly extraordinary occurred, that Jesus simply remained in Nazareth until the commencement of his public ministry. For others, conversely, it serves as compelling evidence of the exact opposite, that something truly extraordinary transpired, an unfolding of events too vast and profound to seamlessly fit within the meticulously curated framework of the canonical Gospels. The enduring persistence of this silence also eloquently reflects a fundamental yearning inherent in humanity itself. Across diverse cultures and civilizations, people instinctively project into this historical gap the narratives they most profoundly need and desire. In India, the cherished memory of Isa serves to affirm that Jesus embraced and connected with their spiritual land. In Tibet, the echoes of a revered Western sage confirm that their profound wisdom extended far beyond the majestic Himalayas. In Persia, the enduring link to the Magi deepens their ancient spiritual connection to his life. Each distinct culture thus fills the silence with its own unique reflection, subtly transforming an absence into a profound sense of shared belonging and spiritual kinship. Perhaps this is the fundamental reason why the profound silence has never been definitively broken. For if an exhaustive, definitive record were ever discovered, if a lost gospel were to miraculously emerge, meticulously detailing every single aspect of those years, the intrinsic mystery would inevitably vanish. This strategic silence, therefore, is an integral component of the profound power inherent in his story. It is this very silence that enables him to remain universally accessible, profoundly adaptable, and vibrantly present in numerous spiritual traditions, without ever being rigidly confined or exclusively claimed by any single one. And so the profound silence endures, not as an emptiness or a void, but rather as an active, perpetual invitation. It beckons each successive generation to listen intently, to wonder deeply, and to imagine expansively. It opens a sacred space where the realms of unwavering faith and historical inquiry seamlessly converge, where informed speculation breathes harmoniously alongside devout belief. It serves as a potent reminder that the story of Jesus is far from finished, far from contained, and certainly not limited. It stretches boundlessly across vast deserts and towering mountains, weaves its way through ancient scrolls and enduring legends, and echoes through persistent whispers that steadfastly refuse to fade into oblivion. The silence, therefore, is not a void, but a translucent veil, a veil that simultaneously conceals and profoundly reveals, allowing just enough intriguing shadow to render the underlying spiritual light even more compelling and luminous. Perhaps that is precisely why it has endured for 2 millennia, because in its profound mystery lies its unparalleled strength. History is frequently conceptualized as a pristine, transparent window, offering us an unadulterated glimpse into the unvarnished truth of the past. However, far more often, it functions as an intricately woven veil, meticulously crafted by diligent scribes, influential priests, and powerful rulers, deliberately draped over significant events to conceal as much as it selectively reveals. The enigmatic missing years of Jesus may stand as one of history's most meticulously drawn veils, a paradoxical fabric so exquisitely sheer that the general light of truth passes through, yet simultaneously so profoundly opaque that the intricate specific details remain stubbornly hidden from view. When one observes closely, a distinct pattern of concealment emerges within historical accounts. Entire decades of significant silence are inexplicably removed from the narrative. Any allusions to foreign territories and venerable sages from distant lands are either deliberately omitted or summarily dismissed. Furthermore, ancient writings that articulated alternative spiritual perspectives with too much fervor were systematically suppressed or utterly obliterated. Consequently, what has been bequeathed to us is not an authentic, comprehensive portrayal, but rather a meticulously fashioned representation, carefully curated to bolster specific theological doctrines and reinforce institutional authority. Nevertheless, no such veil can ever achieve absolute perfection. Through its intricate weave, subtle flickers of illumination inevitably manage to escape. Enduring legends recounting the sojourn of Isa in India, or of Uz Asaf in Kashmir, and the faint echoes resonating from ancient Tibetan monasteries. These may well represent the delicate threads of a broader truth that permeated the historical barrier. Apocryphal Gospels, such as those attributed to Thomas and Philip, preserve profound sayings that radiate with a distinct Oriental sensibility. Even within the traditionally accepted canonical Gospels, a discerning reader can perceive subtle suggestions of influences extending far beyond the confines of Judea, the noticeable presence of Greek terminology, the evocative imagery of universal divine light, and the enigmatic visit of the Magi, who journeyed from the distant lands of Persia. Could it be that this historical veil was not merely a passive oversight, but rather a deliberate imposition, erected not because there was an absence of information beyond it, but precisely because there was an overwhelming abundance? To safeguard a simple, easily digestible narrative, the intricate possibilities of Jesus's potential peregrinations were intentionally obscured. To uphold the nascent authority of the burgeoning church, the universal scope of his profound influences was subtly subdued. This veil was deemed essential to maintain doctrinal order and institutional stability. Yet behind its carefully drawn fabric, a more comprehensive and stirring narrative continues to resonate. Perhaps the very mechanism of history perpetually operates in this manner. What humanity inherits is rarely the unadulterated reality, but invariably a version meticulously molded by those who possess the power to chronicle and interpret events. The veil, in this context, functions both as an instrument of concealment and as a form of protection, safeguarding vulnerable societies from stories deemed excessively destabilizing to assimilate. Yet, perpetual seekers inherently perceive the subtle contours of these historical folds, persistently probe at the fabric of accepted narratives, and forever yearn for a glimpse of what lies just beyond. In the particular instance of Jesus, this historical veil may indeed constitute the most profound aspect of his enigmatic nature. For beyond its shimmering surface, creative speculation flourishes with boundless energy. Behind its mystery, diverse cultures across the globe appropriate his persona, claiming him as an integral part of their own spiritual heritage. Behind its deliberate obscurity, the missing years of his life take on a boundless potentiality. Were the veil to be entirely removed, his narrative might conceivably feel diminished and restricted to a specific time and place. With its presence, however, his story extends its reach to every conceivable horizon of human experience and understanding. Therefore, when one speaks of these missing years, one is not merely addressing a void or a chronological gap. One is contemplating the veil of history itself, intentionally erected and purposefully maintained, beckoning us towards contemplative wonder. And perhaps this profound invitation was always the underlying intent. For some truths are not destined to be transmitted with definitive precision and certainty, but rather to be perceived through an enigmatic lens, glimpsed just beyond the folds of the historical fabric, glistening akin to illumination filtering through woven threads. Mystery, far from being an impediment, presents itself as a compelling entreaty. The profound quietude of the missing years does not preclude comprehension. Instead, it holds the door to understanding partially open, enticing us to traverse its threshold. Each compelling legend, each fragmented clue, each faint whisper of a concealed journey serves as a guiding filament, drawing us deeper into an intricate maze of awe-inspiring inquiry. For some individuals, this inherent mystery elicits doubt and skepticism. They interpret it as a direct confrontation to established belief, suggesting that the conventional depiction of Jesus is deficient or incomplete. But for others, the very absence acquires a sacred significance. It enables the narrative to gain vitality, to expand its scope, and to interlace with profound wisdom traditions far beyond the geographical boundaries of Judea. This pervasive mystery transforms the humble carpenter's son into a universal figure whose profound compassion might well have been molded by encounters across vast deserts, towering mountains, and expansive seas. Every unresolved query thus becomes an expansive gateway. Could the ethical teachings of the Sermon on the Mount resonate with similarities to ancient Buddhist sutras, emphasizing inner peace and detachment? Could the parables of seeds and hidden treasures evoke allegories found in ancient Indian philosophical texts, speaking of spiritual growth and concealed wisdom? Could the vivid imagery of light and darkness mirror the ancient fire hymns of Persia, reflecting Zoroastrian dualism and divine illumination? Each such possibility prompts contemplative inquiry, not with the aim of reaching a conclusive determination, but to venture into the boundless realm of creative conjecture and intellectual exploration. The pervasive mystery also beckons us to introspection, for if the kingdom of heaven is truly within, as the Gospel of Thomas suggests, then perhaps the missing years are primarily concerned with spiritual rather than terrestrial explorations. They serve as a poignant reminder that unspoken moments, too, can impart profound lessons. That what is not explicitly stated can direct our understanding with equal potency and significance as what has been meticulously recorded. In this profound manner, the missing years serve as a reflective surface. They project an image not only of who Jesus might have been, but also of who we are as dedicated seekers of truth. Do we crave definitive knowledge, longing for history to furnish us with an uninterrupted chronicle? Or do we, conversely, embrace the allure of enigma, accepting the possibility that reality might be too expansive and multifaceted to capture within any solitary, definitive narrative? Perhaps this is precisely why the narrative persists across millennia, because in its inherent lacuna, it actively calls to us. It entices us to participate in the ongoing quest, to traverse the concealed pathways of creative thought, to wonder what might reside just beyond the veil of established tradition. It implores us to incline towards the unspoken and hear what whispers there, echoes of distant lands, of overlooked manuscripts, of submerged insights patiently poised for reemergence. Mystery does not lessen the profound story of Jesus. Rather, it greatly enlarges its scope. It extends his reach from the humble beginnings in Nazareth to the majestic Himalayas, from the familiar shores of Galilee to the distant Andes, transforming him from a figure of factual chronicle into a mythic narrative. And in that expansive stretching, the story becomes what it was always meant to be, a living enigma, eternal, limitless, perpetually unfolding. As one follows these faint murmurs, one should not pursue definitive conclusions. Instead, one ought to embrace the beckoning. For in mystery, the narrative thrives, and in silence, the expedition persists. The missing years continue to persist as unchronicled periods. The ancient manuscripts remain concealed, and the specific movements of Jesus are undocumented. What we currently possess are dispersed remnants, faint murmurs, and enduring myths, evocative echoes from India, Tibet, Persia, and even the distant American continents. They do not furnish conclusive evidence, but they undeniably offer us potential scenarios, and such possibility is the very genesis of investigation. How does one contend with this profound quietude? Some individuals choose to disregard it entirely, remaining satisfied with the received narrative as it has been transmitted. Others, however, approach with greater attentiveness, perceiving the lacunae as eloquent pronouncements, endeavoring to uncover significance concealed by exclusion. The captivating charm of the missing years is not that they will attain definitive elucidation, but that they perpetually underscore the vast expanse of perpetual mystery that surrounds human existence. Every life, even the most extraordinary, encompasses periods of quietude. Every narrative possesses its undisclosed segments. To revere these unstated intervals is to accept that verity frequently transcends chronological records, proving larger than what can be inscribed in any single volume. Therefore, let the mystery guide us towards awe rather than conclusive replies. Engage with the canonical Gospels, but also explore the non-canonical writings. Listen intently to the legends of Tibet and Kashmir, but also to the unspoken interims that lie between them. Ask questions not to arrive at certainty, but to ignite intellectual inquisitiveness. For perhaps the ultimate point of the missing years is not to reveal Jesus' geographical whereabouts, but to remind us that the quest itself possesses spiritual significance. In the final analysis, the expedition of investigation is incumbent upon us to undertake, just as the unseen pathways might have once belonged to him. What one will discover is not a final determination, but an expansive gateway, a sacred space where belief and creative thought converge, where chronicle and myth interweave, where the silence itself serves as a compass. And as one finds repose, let the enigma persist. For it is in mystery that the narrative perseveres, not as a deciphered conundrum, but as a dynamic inquiry. A question that murmurs through epochs, inviting each of us to traverse our personal uncharted path, perpetually pursuing that which resides just beyond the visible boundary.